Starts right now. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Put this up here. Fill up the stream.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Remnant. Obviously, as mentioned in the title and in the cells for the YouTube video or the YouTube live stream, as well as this space, we're hoping, at the very least, to be joined by Jeremy Kauffman from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire to chat about a variety of different topics, but primarily libertarian strategy and also some immigration stuff, because as we all know, immigration is just not a topic that's discussed enough within the libertarian community at the moment. So we figured, why not bring it up again? So, Zulu, I know you're on the co-host panel now, or on the panel. So, how's it going, man? How you doing? Oh, speaking of which, Jeremy's just arrived, so I'll bring him up.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. We pretty good show today. I believe this is our first guest, actually, apart from just
Yes,
people calling in.
our first proper guest, properly understood as like someone we've invited on the show. Obviously, we have lots of people that come through and want to say their piece during the space. That's why we do it on this platform. But yes, first person we've actually specifically invited to come on. Or well, I did anyway. I saw Jeremy put up something about how he wanted to go on various libertarian platforms to discuss these issues. And I just kind of was like, oh, if you want to come on the Remnant, you can. And then I mentioned to Zulu later on. I was like, oh, by the way, I invited Jeremy on, and he was cool with that. So I've sent Jeremy an invite to speak. So we'll obviously wait on him to come up. But anyway, just in general, how's things been? You been traveling okay?
Yeah, I've been working on a few videos. I'm gonna be making a video on Pluribus. I think I've mentioned that already. And I've also been working on a collaboration with Taxed Brass. So we're hoping to get that done, you know, roughly by the end of the month, hopefully. Depends on how things go, of course.
That's cool. I thought Tax Brass has been doing pretty well as far as his platform is concerned. I think his last video, which was on Legal Eagle, the shitlib lawyer guy that makes big videos about how Trump bad. That went pretty crazy. I think it had nearly 100,000 views in 3 days, which is pretty awesome for a channel of his size. Um, I think he around the 20,000 subscriber mark. So that was pretty awesome. So yeah, good to hear about you guys collaborating. Anyway, with that said, Jeremy's up on the speaker panel now. So obviously, want to introduce him and say hello, Jeremy. How's things?
Hey fellas, it's and I mean there could be women here, but I'll say hey fellas. It's
Unlikely. I will probably say.
Yeah, look, it's good to be chatting with you guys. Look, we can yell at each other, and maybe we will, but I think part of what makes these debates a little bit vicious at times is because we do agree with each other on a lot of things. I would guess, and you can of course tell me that I'm an idiot here, but I would guess, we agree with each other on 90 to 95% of things, and that's what makes us so bothered by the areas that we disagree. And I'm not really a utopian, but to the extent that I'm a utopian, like I want a society that produces justice, judicial outcomes, court outcomes, resolves disputes in a manner that would be pretty close to the types of decisions that I suspect, you being Monarcho Hopian and Zulu, would make. And so I think to the extent that we have a disagreement, it's about how we get these outcomes. And so that would sort of be my opening position here, is that we agree on a lot of things. We do ultimately want outcomes. Like, even if you're more of a more deontological than I am, you still want a society that produces deontological outcomes. And so we have these disagreements over how you produce them. So feel free to dispute the premise, or feel free to accept the premise and engage in dispute past the premise. But that's my sort of opening statement.
For sure. I'll throw to Zulu real quick after I've said this, but I just wanted to agree with you off the front end. Like, we do agree. Again, 90 to 95% is probably the rough mark as far as, prescriptions that we would both have. And as you said, that tends to be why these disagreements can be, so vociferous, you might say, because when you can see the other person like has the same fundamental reasoning positions as far as like how they're building up to their positions, and then so from my perspective, and I'm sure from your perspective, it's like, well, why the fuck can't this guy just get it? Like, at least when you're like arguing with the communists or something, you can kind of see, okay, this person just lacks reasoning ability. Okay, it's clear that this person just doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're just starting from fundamentally absurd positions and premises. And so at least you can chalk it up to, well, we're just never going to agree because this person is just starting from the completely different and completely wrong place. And so you're right. It's probably a result of the level of disagreement and the as I said, the forcefulness, I suppose, of it is probably a result of, as you said, the fact that we start from similar positions potentially, and it's just, you kind of like, oh well, why can't this guy just get it? So anyway, I'll throw to Zulu on that if you wanted to, jump into kind of the. I suspected we were going to go to more to the strategic stuff pretty quickly. So Zulu, if you want to jump in on that at all, please go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And also, thank you very much to Jeremy for coming on. I think it's a good idea to, even though there are plenty of discussions on immigration, of course. I don't know that I've seen. I certainly haven't done any with Jeremy before, so it should be interesting. So I would say my kind of problem with that opening there is the framing of it. Like, I agree that we probably agree on, if we were to look into our mind's eyes and think, what would the ideal society look like? Where would I want to live? It's probably going to look incredibly similar for each of us, at least as far as like, rights enforcement and whatnot is concerned. But I don't take that as being fundamental when the question is, how should anarcho-capitalists, how should libertarians feel about some issue? It's not what sort of bureaucratic structure do I want to deal with some sorts of problems which might come up. And I do agree that, I've said this before, probably of the people who are open borders, I am like on the top, like 1% of people who hate the immigrants the most. Like, I very much see all of the problems. I understand the problems. They're not just like, oh, immigrants are so brilliant. And then, there is a question of, well, how do you deal with these problems? And that's a valid question. But I think the more fundamental question is, well, what do you have the right to do with respect to that? What are the rights in the question? I don't see law as studying like a structure, a bureaucracy. Law is just, it's a set of facts about what is the proper way to handle this dispute, given that there is such a thing as scarcity. We can have conflict. So what is proper with respect to conflicts? And I think the answer is very, very much just the non-aggression principle. And the non-aggression principle and all the corollaries you can get from that. I don't think that law goes any further than that.
Yeah, I think the problem is, and I by the way, I also I like you guys. To me, I see debates as a failure mode, right? Debates are for when two people can't communicate in good faith, and so therefore we need to have an adversarial debate. And it's good that we have debates when we reach that stage. I would like to keep this as like more of a sort of cooperative conversation rather than digging our heels in. Let's say that we may not have precisely the same interpretation of the NAP, but let's say that we like roughly do. It seems clear to me that other people can have vastly different interpretations of what's aggression. It's easy for a socialist to say that, yeah, look, it's aggression when you're not supporting the poor, you're killing them. That's an act of aggression. It's aggression when you're not masking during COVID. That's aggression. And obviously, these are not my definitions of aggression, but this idea that, like, part of the problem that I'm trying to get people to see is that we, we abstract things to these words, but the ways that the words map back onto reality inside of individuals' heads is different. And I'm trying to reconcile this in a way that's maximally compatible with, sort of classic libertarian ideology. My problem is sort of a lot of the classic libertarian thinkers have sort of not grappled with the fact that, oh, it's just the NAP. Like, it's not that simple, because a lot of people's interpretation of what aggression is would not be our interpretation of aggression. So.
Sure, and definitely a lot of people, I would say, are wrong about what aggression is, but I don't really see what the upshot is with respect to, like, me, right? I think that the fundamental thing that I should be doing is just saying that, well, no, you're wrong about, if you're saying that it's aggression to exploit the proletariat or whatever. That's not what aggression means. Aggression means this, that, and the other thing, and just win on the level of philosophy, and everything else I think is just downstream of that. I don't see what it matters that really people are wrong about things, because people will always be wrong about things.
Well, I'm sort of on the opposite side of theory here, where I see the mission of free staters, of libertarians in New Hampshire, to attempt to achieve our ideology to the maximum possible degree in the real world. And if that requires compromising a little bit, then we'll compromise, even if we're not happy about it. And so, like, how do you produce a society that produces legal outcomes, that produces justice systems, whether you're going ANCAP or minarchy or something else, that's going to produce outcomes that share your definitions? Because my sense is, if you have a society in which 95% of people do not agree on roughly our understanding of what aggression is, you're never going to get justice systems that produce those outcomes. And so therefore it becomes a requirement, and we can debate how much so, but it becomes somewhat of a requirement that at least a decent portion of the populace, certainly those with power, share or roughly share our understandings of aggression.
Definitely true. I will say that is, I know we're probably going to get to a place where we'll disagree, like, down the line, but I agree, and that's what I think you have to do in order to produce this society where the people who are running the justice systems are actually adhering, for the most part at least, to what I understand to be the correct theory of law. And the way I'm doing that is, I think the fundamental way is, again, winning on the philosophy. Now, there are a few ways you can do that. You can, go out, do Isaiah's job, and reach the remnant and so on, and that, over the long run will win. Or even, I think New Hampshire is a good example of this. You stack the deck. You cram as many people who accept your philosophy into one area, and then you have effectively changed the philosophy in that area. But that is the fundamental, I'm saying, that you have to change the philosophy, and then the bureaucratic structures are all downstream of that changed philosophy.
Okay, so then what's the heart of the disagreement here? If we accept that there must be some consideration of the proportion of people in a polity sharing your interpretations and meanings of words, there's still some sort of and by the way, like, I don't think I have all the answers. You know, I often find that some of the people who disagree with me, they have a stronger vision than I do. I feel like often I'm like trying to get smart people to simply accept the premise. Because if we accept the premise, we can work together to find the solutions. Because I still want to achieve libertarianism in the real world. I would, you know, I've read all the, all of the books. I want to achieve the closest to this kind of thing that we can do in reality, and and then I try to square the theory with reality, and then all these people get mad at me, and so you know, like I, what is the heart of the disagreement? Is it that we have to? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Sometimes it feels like the answer is we have to follow the NAP even if it means we lose, and that's certainly something I wouldn't accept. So if that's the disagreement, we can get into that. But if it's something like, hey, there's a way to get these outcomes another way, that I would be much more open-minded to hearing and and being persuaded to.
I'll just jump quickly in on that one because I think you did. I think your suspicion is correct. I think the heart of the disagreement is that myself and Zulu are going to hold the position that you should never initiate conflicts. That the non-aggression principle should be followed in all cases. That is going to be the heart of the disagreement. And I was gonna, before you actually, kind of spoke to it, I was going to say, look, our position is going to be that the policies that I've seen yourself and like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire advocate for online as far as immigration, and we can get into immigration specifically if you want to, and a variety of these other positions, I would consider to be not adhering to the non-aggression principle. And to that end, like as Zulu kind of spoke to earlier, our position isn't that the non-aggression principle describes some future state of affairs that we hope to eventually arrive at as far as the bureaucratic structure of society and how different systems of of dispensing justice and legal norms and that kind of thing. That's not what we think the NAP describes. What we think the NAP describes is the justified boundaries of interpersonal conduct. And so if that is the case, then it's going to follow that that it holds whether we live in a society that broadly accepts the NAP or not, right? So whether or not it is the case that society more broadly accepts, hey, we should follow the NAP, or the bureaucratic structures are using that as their foundation for law, it's still going to be the case that myself as an individual and everyone else that's in this space or on YouTube or just in society in general, it still follows that they ought to follow the non-aggression principle in every case, even if it is the case that the society more broadly doesn't accept the non-aggression principle. And I just quickly, and we can get more into this, but I want to jump to Zulu. I don't accept the idea that it following the non-aggression principle requires you to accept all these bad outcomes that yourself and the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's X page, which I know you're a part of, but I know you're not the only one that posts from that account. The kind of consequences that you guys will put forth as being a result of following the NAP maximally, I don't accept that they would occur, and I don't accept the position that seems to be advocated for, that the non-aggression principle implies some level of pacifism or refusal to respond to people who are potentially going to initiate conflicts against you. Anyway, we'll jump to Zula, and then Jeremy can obviously jump back in on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a bit. If you two do have, at least in future, if you two do want to like go back and forth on something, I mean, feel free. This isn't just my podcast, so I will just put that on the table. Definitely doesn't just need to be me and Jeremy going at it. I did want to pick up, because I mean I agree with what Monhop was saying there. I do want to pick up on this notion of, well, what about what about if we're following the NEP and that leads to us losing? I think that is really where the big disagreement originates from, because I don't think it is the case that you can kind of break the rules that we are supposed to be setting forth, and then that can somehow bring about the world we want. right? Because what would it look like for libertarianism to be victorious? It would look like the philosophy of the day, at least in some area, be including libertarianism. Now, I don't think it's possible to achieve that if you are openly advocating that libertarianism is false, which is what you would have to do if you wanted to advocate a violation of the non-aggression principle. If you advocate to commit aggression, you're not going to sway the needle towards a world where people think it's wrong to commit aggression.
Well, I feel like I can simply say that immigration, or at least a sufficient quantity of it. And I by the way, I think these questions are tricky. I think immigration is analogous to other classic libertarian problems, like, what's the quantity of photons that constitutes light pollution? What's the quantity of noise that constitutes noise pollution? How many sieverts can you emit from your house before you're harming your neighbor? These are classically hard libertarian problems, and the libertarian literature, mostly says these should be resolved locally, that there's not an absolute answer that can be, derived a priori. And, I think that immigration is analogous to this. And so I'm not necessarily accepting the premise that our policies are, quote unquote, NAP violations. I think it's easy for me to say simply that it is not a NAP violation. That if immigration would, if I have an existing, like, let's imagine we're starting from a roughly libertarian state, or not a state, a roughly libertarian society, maybe it's an ANCAP and it's all voluntary or whatever. But if someone is taking acts, if someone is performing, immigration, or immigration is happening in such a way that it would disrupt or ruin or destroy the existing justice system that I have that is roughly NAP compliant, then I feel like I can simply say, well, the immigration is a NAP violation, and if you don't like that definition, then it still seems like even in your own framework, you're going to have to deal with people like me, and so it feels like there's just no way around the fact that if you want justice outcomes, if you want jurisprudence, court-based outcomes, and that are going to be analogous, that are going to be compliant with what you want, there has to be some consideration for the makeup of your society. There's just no way around this.
So I think I might have got that already. So are you saying that you're saying this is sort of like a continuum problem? It's at least analogous to the problem of how many photons is it before it becomes like, a giga laser which destroys your house, right? So for those continuum problems, there has to be some principal difference at either end of the continuum. The principal difference with the laser gun is, in one case, it clearly creates conflict because your house is destroyed. You can no longer use your house anymore. And if it's just a single photon, it doesn't create conflict. So that's what we'd have to have for a continuum. And it sounds like you're saying the principal difference in the case of immigration is that if you have many, many, many immigrants, at least of a certain type, there are immigrants who you would believe that they're not like liable to become libertarians because of their biological makeup or whatever. I'm assuming there. Are you saying that is like sort of what you see as the principal difference between many immigrants of a certain type and very, very few immigrants?
Yeah, I think the problem is roughly like that. If we imagine starting from a community of 1,000, perfectly NAP compliant, to all the listeners of this podcast, we're all perfect NAP followers, and we all live in a community, and there's 1,000 of us. Could we handle, one Somalian? Yeah, we'd absorb one Somalian without any difficulty. But if there's 1,000 of us, and could we handle 100,000 Somalians? No, we wouldn't have our society at all. And I do believe, despite being a famous internet racist, I do believe there's some proportion of Somalians. I believe it's like a very low proportion. I do believe there's some who are compatible. So my claims are never it's zero from any place. But it clearly, the rates do vary, quite a bit. And we don't even have to imagine that Somalians. We could imagine it's 100,000 white socialists, the problem would be the same. And so at low degrees, you can handle it and you can integrate it. But if you, if you are going, if your population is going to be completely displaced, there's no way that you can maintain your systems. They simply won't work. And so it does seem analogous, to these types of continuum problems.
Okay, so I would say the reason why that isn't a principal difference is we would need to you need to separate actions when you're doing legal analysis, right? Some specific actions being done by the immigrants would have to be destroying this NAP compliant legal system. And it's definitely not clear to me that the specific action being done which destroys this system is that they moved over from Somalia or from California or wherever it is. That isn't clear to me at all. What would be clear to me is if they come and they start voting for socialist policies. Sure, you could say, hey, they're being aggressive there. They're trying to implement some socialist dictatorship in this area of New Hampshire, in Grafton, New Hampshire, or whatever it is, where we've already pretty much got Tancapistan. They're being aggressive against us. I could see that, but you would need to look at the specific actions, and then when we've identified the specific actions being done, then we can figure out, well, what is the proper way to deal with that aggression?
To be clear, and just to jump in on this, because Jeremy, obviously you specifically framed this within the context of an NAP compliant society, right? And in that case, we're going to presume here that all the land in that society is privatized. Every single person, every single piece of property has an individual owner. So in that case, you could preemptively exclude people on literally any basis you wanted to. It wouldn't even have to. You wouldn't have to prove that there was any aggression that was going to be carried out by that person. You could just say, well, I suspect that this person might in the future aggress, so I'm going to preemptively remove you from my property, right? Because it's your property. The problem is that that's not the case at the moment, right? Where we're talking about, public property, which, Zulu and I are going to have a specific view on, the ownership status of that land. But suffice to say, we don't think that the state has the right to that land. And so for them to exclude people is unjustified according to the non-aggression principle. So in an ANCAP society, you could basically do exactly what you're describing. I mean, with limits, obviously, there's elements of proportionality that need to be followed, and gentleness as far as how you can exclude people from your property. But broadly, yes, like you could exclude people on, as I said, literally any basis that you wanted to, and it would be justified if it was property that either you owned or you were acting at the behest of the owner. So in that specific context, like, it's fine. You can do exactly what you're describing. It's just within the context of, living in reality, so to speak, that kind of changes things from our perspective.
Sure, and I see a number of people raising hands, and so I want to let them jump in. Although it's your show, so I'll let you call on them. I think this idea, and I am for private property maximalism, but this idea that private property maximalism is I am myself on my own property, and nothing I do spills out to my neighbors or those around me. I think is kind of foolish or naive, or is a sort of spherical cow type thinking. Even if we start from every man owns their own property and everything is contract law, I'm going to contract with my neighbors. We're going to reproduce neighborhoods. We're going to reproduce communities, and our communities are going to have, rules. I have no desire to, I don't want to enforce immigration law in Minneapolis and Minnesota. I only want to force that immigration law in those places because I'm unfortunately in a compact with them. And anyone there is in my nation generally. If they were independent of me, this would be fine. But when we look at the local level, there's always going to be some kinds of agreements. There's going to be some kinds of contractual agreements. And again, we as libertarians and voluntarists and anarcho-capitalists, we should want them to be as voluntary as possible. But there's always going to be some kind of agreements that are going to exist, with me and my neighbors. And if I, if a bunch of, citizens abut a factory, and the factory owner wants to bring in, 100,000 third worlders or 10,000. Let's go back to our 1,000 person town. If they want to bring in, even 500 or 1,000 people from the third world who are, who are way more likely to litter, who are way more likely to commit crime, who are way more likely to do these things. There's just no way that this does not, spill over. Sure, you would say, okay, well, they have an insurer, and their insurer is guaranteeing that they won't leave their property, and so on and so forth. And so it's like, okay, if we get in like very perfect, types of worlds, maybe I can kind of see this. But in reality, if this is happening today, when a bunch of people from the third world come into, an American town that is not full of third worlders, they change the town. There's just no way that this doesn't. And I don't just mean change the town culturally. I mean, they commit more crime, they litter more, they degrade the town, and these are negative externalities. And so even if you say, oh well, we should simply punish them, when they commit violations, that's still an externality, because we know that it's going to increase the costs of producing justice. It's going to increase the policing costs. It's going to increase the amount of resources required to stop these people. And so this idea that a property owner can simply invite infinity numbers of these people onto their land, like, are they staying entirely on the land? If they're not, then you immediately have externalities. And even if they're staying entirely on the land, are they really? Like, this again, it seems like there's no way around this being something of a risk. And again, one of the reasons I'm not a conservative and still consider myself a libertarian is I believe in markets. I believe in free markets. I would like market-based ways of solving these problems. I'm for insurance markets and ways of solving these problems in market-based ways. But to say that it's simply not a NAP violation, and the factory can have, can double the population of a town and bring in, a bunch of third world workers who are likely to have negative externalities. I don't accept this even in a NAP framework, and it's even easier to reject it in a consequentialist framework.
I think we definitely could go into this more, but I don't want to make a point and then go, okay, well now we go back into the hands or anything, because then you're not able to respond. But if we do want to go to hands, because people, they might have relevant questions, I think that would be appropriate. We've been at this for like half an hour now. It seems appropriate to do at least a couple hands.
Yeah, for sure. I will say to people that, like, we are going to, obviously this is a different episode to how we normally function, so it is going to be primarily like this kind of back and forth. So yes, absolutely, people can jump in, and we'll go to Man, and then we'll go to You Can Always Change Your Mind. But for going forward, as far as people putting their hands up, absolutely, we'll let you jump in at some point and ask a question. But keeping kind of things as brief as possible, so we can make sure the dialogue keeps up in the kind of frame that it's been going. But yeah, anyway, Man, jump in, man. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So I don't know if Jeremy remembers, but around 6 months back, we used to have a lot of back and forth along these lines only. And so first of all, I would say that I've been following Jeremy for a long time. He used to be my favorite person on the Free Stater podcast back in the day, 2-3 years ago. I don't know what happened to that. But with, basically him, I don't know if he moved away or he just always believed in, the basically the anti-NAP views. I think there is more nuance to his views listening to this, but it certainly does not come off as nuanced on the LPNH and his personal account, So, so there is a lot of admiration of Jeremy's past in me, and of course, thus there is anger online, because once again, it's like, well, this guy believes how basically a lot of what I believe. How come he is not coming to the same conclusions, right? And so I would preface it with that. I would, though, in the continuation of discussion, let's think about that. Like, if you have how if we have a town of 1,000 NAP compliant libertarians, right? And we're talking about Ancapistan, we're talking about pure ANCAP frameworks of things. So if you have just those 1,000 people, like, why would you in? There would be, of course, voluntary contracts on the basis of who you can and cannot invite. And you wouldn't want to invite socialists, you wouldn't want to invite fascists, you wouldn't want to invite NAP breakers, right? And so I feel like this is a redundant problem. Like when people talk about open borders and immigration enforcement, we're talking about the current government way of doing things, right? And because there is public property, uh, on that public property, the government is illegitimate to, enforce anything, because the government should not exist in the first place, because it's a NAP violation. And the negative externalities that Jeremy speaks of are real, but they're caused by the public property. And so the advocacy should not be that, hey, look at all these negative externalities, therefore we should empower the government more in the area of immigration enforcement, because you don't just get immigration enforcement, you get a lot of other things on top of that, right? Like statism bleeds over other places then. But the conversation should be use the same concrete instances of those externalities and advocate for privatizing property, right? Because right now libertarians don't hold power, right? Even in New Hampshire, there is an influence of libertarianism in the NH House, as much as I know, but it's not absolute power, right? And so, like, the option that you have is not really should libertarians support open borders or closed borders, because that question will never come up. When we have a libertarian society, the question will become moot because everything gets privatized. It's that should we use the problems caused by public property and immigration on top of that? Should we use that as a means of now supporting the government, like LPNH often does? And what that does is that, you know like, I made a point today that every major libertarian online, right? LPNH has disagreements with them and has clashed with them. So the goal of LPNH, and I really believe in the Free State Project, and I would one day want to settle in New Hampshire. And so, the goal should be to advertise to libertarians and not to, random right wingers who hate us as much as anybody else, right? So, like, don't these are real problems, but there are NAP compliant solutions to these problems and NAP compliant ways of thinking about these problems. And that should be the messaging coming from the from LPNH, from Jeremy, from Free Staters, right? Like, uh, use this as a means of showing the problems with public property and the need for privatization. And of course, like, the problem of infinity immigration, court systems, private contracts, voluntary associations, neighborhood associations, to deal with all of that. That, and it's not that immigration is only harmful; it's also in many ways beneficial, right? So, like, there are costs and benefit analysis on top of that, and like, what kind of immigrants? Do we want this type of that type? Like, there are 10,000 questions to ask, and those would be done in a market. That's why you know we can't centrally plan anything, including immigration, right? You don't get infinity anything in a market. Everything has a cost, and so on and so forth. So the market would deal with this. We don't need to plan immigration ahead of time. Like, we don't need to plan anything ahead of time. But in the framework that we currently live in, the political capital that LPNH and Jeremy and the New Hampshire libertarians have, like, they should be using this to message to libertarians to move to New Hampshire, and that has to be a libertarian message. If you're going outside of the NAP and you're pissing off basically every libertarian radical who's the most likely person to move to New Hampshire, you're doing a sabotage of the Free State movement. And you could take the example of the community around in and around Zulu. You could take Per Byland, who was saying the same thing. Stephen Kinsella has also feuded with the LPNH. So if your messaging is leading to all the libertarians thinking that LPNH is not libertarian, not a lot of them will move to New Hampshire, and that has to be taken into account, right? And so I would say that's what I would like to say. And I do appreciate Jeremy for coming on here. Like you have, I would say that I thought you were much dumber than you are, and so that just gives me hope. So you're much smarter than
Yeah, well, you got to be a little bit dumb to post on X as much as I do. But
I.
look, look, it's not. There's a couple of things I would disagree with there. So I definitely do not accept the idea that sort of government property is unowned, and the comparable sort of alternative scenario is that this land is unhomesteaded or whatever. I think that's wrong. I think that the comparable scenario is much more analogous to a joint stock corporation. I think I am unfortunately trapped in a joint stock corporation with way more people than I want to be trapped in one with. So I'm not defending the entire status quo, but I think the idea that government property is simply unknown is completely incorrect. And part of what I've been in New Hampshire for 10 years, and I've seen who's effective and who isn't. This is a realistic movement that is trying to inch the ball forward, inch by inch by inch. And the types of people who come in here and demand more purism and critique elected anarcho-capitalists who are trying to move the ball forward, facing the messy and real world trade-offs that exist in the real world, I find some of these people to be counterproductive. And I'm not saying that it's everyone here on the call, but I think there are people who manage to get into libertarianism because they hold sort of, and I'm not saying this is you, Man, nor am I saying that it's anyone specifically here, but there are certainly some people who get into libertarianism because it permits them to be angry. It permits them to blame the government for all of their faults.
Mhm.
It permits them to want to tear things down and drag things into the dirt. And the people I've seen who come here, and so part of both my strategy and LPNH's strategy is we've seen who comes here and who is successful. And we want more of these people. All right. The House Majority Leader in New Hampshire, Jason Osborne, he went to school at Mises. He's a Rothbardian ANCAP. And he's saying, I'm glad that the state of New Hampshire is cooperating with ICE. I think this is part of, sort of the realistic, real world types of compromises that need to be made in terms of how we advance the ball in New Hampshire. And I think if someone is going to come here and be so purist that they're like, all right, I'll give you an example. All right, so a lot of people here are very NAP focused. Okay, there's a vote in the New Hampshire State House. And again, we don't always have, you can invent more pure solutions, but often what's on the table is A or B. Okay. And so you're in the State House and there's a vote to go down and tear down statues of communists that are on state property. But you know what?
Good.
Tearing down statues of communists costs tax money. Okay.
Mhm.
So technically speaking, when you press the button to say, let's tear down the statues of communists, you are very slightly spending the tax money of other people that they did not consent to. Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be honest. I want people who slam the green button, who say, yes, of course we want to tear down the statues of communists. Would we like to one day get to Ancapistan? Of course we would. Should that be voluntarily funded? Of course it should. But if the choice is leave the statues of communists up or tax everyone in the state 2 pennies to tear the statues down, I'm slamming the green button because tearing down the statues of the communists continues to change the state demographics in my favor, and it continues to advance the free state movement. And so, and so I see all these people who want to criticize us out of libertarian purism. And I think there's a place for, sort of the celibate monk in our movement, who wants to focus on, this is where we want to be heading towards. I don't want to lose.
Being an ANCAP is a good way to be celibate, by the way.
Well, we have a saying here: you got to breed them for freedom. So I mean, I don't know. There's our ANCAPs here tend to have a lot of kids, but I don't like these people who are in other places, like we have a decent idea of what we're doing. We're not doing these things for no reasons. We know who's successful. We're trying to get more of who's successful. Do we want to, I'm all for having a completely privatized immigration policy, but that's not on the table, and so to me, existing immigration policy is much more closer to, when the government is, catching murderers or stopping fraud. And of course, these things should be privatized, but a completely private New Hampshire is still going to, most likely through voluntary contractual agreements built up by the atoms of private property, the most likely scenario is still going to be some immigration restrictions. And so this idea that simply because it wasn't built via those atoms, therefore we have to allow, infinite immigration. I think this is crazy. But to be clear, like, neither myself nor LPNH believes that libertarians only come from one place. I believe there are libertarians all over the world. I believe they are disproportionately in some areas. And I do think libertarians from certain areas need to recognize that they're especially unusual. But I do not believe that, any particular ethnicity precludes someone from being a libertarian. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say the fundamental disagreement then is the public property point. Like, is public property unowned, or is it? I think you're coming far more from a Hoppian point of view. And I think that should be dealt with Zulu because he's the expert on this topic. But I think that is, if we convince you on that, then you'll come to our side. But I would just deal with the two other questions that two other statements you said, and then I'd hand it over to Zulu, and I'll go to sleep because it's 4 a.m. and I just wanted to talk to you guys, so I just stayed
cheers.
up.
Thanks for staying up to tune in.
Thank you. And I would say the two things that you said was, one was that Jason Osborne, and by the way, I follow New Hampshire politics very closely, and so because I want to one day be there, right? And I've contributed monetarily in the past as well. So,
sure.
So,
and to be clear, I support New Hampshire making it feasible for libertarians to come here from all over the world. I think that is an important part of what we're, trying to do. So,
yeah, I know you have said statements in the past, like, but the problem with, I would say, doing it as a reasonable compromise is that, like, if it's just about murderers and fraudsters and all of those things, and you could do that in a private property setting as well, sure, but ICE is primarily going to target peaceful people as well, right? Like that's the problem is that, and also you're opening the door to the federal government coming in and doing anything, because it's not like like they're not just going to be immigrants. These are thugs, right? Like that's what I would say. Like, be very wary of letting those people in. Like, those are not good people. Like, they live, and of course the FBI visited you, and you were very heroic in scaring them off. Like, that could be ICE tomorrow. Like, like a president can come in and say that anybody who disagrees with me is no longer a citizen, and then you're on the chopping board, right? So, like, these things can get out of hand very fast. So I would just say, get, like a soft secession, right? Like, never cooperate with any federal agency. Like, those bills do exist and they can be passed. So I would much farther go on that direction and deal with these things locally, And I would say you'd agree. But uh, uh, I'm not criticizing Jason Osborne. He may have said that and believes that, but broadly, he's a very positive force in the movement. But he's wrong there. And I would say,
there's a lot of people with hands up. Why don't we go to some other? I'm not trying to reject what you said. I'm not
just let
trying
me
to
finish, and I'll be off. Just two seconds, right? On the 2 cents per taxpayer thing, you have a lot of New Hampshire libertarians. Just make it legal to smash communist statues, and people will do it for free, right? Like, you don't need to.
But this is what I'm saying is, like, this is not on the table. That is not a vote that's going to pass. And so, like, you often have the choice. Again, we can dream up more idealistic policies, and of course that would be a better policy, but that's not up for a vote. The only choices of what's going to pass are leave the statue up or have the government go and take them down, at which point you are slightly taxing people. Like, and again, I'm not saying that we can't dream up better scenarios, but that is not what's up for a vote. That is not on the table. Okay. and we should keep that ideal in mind. I do really, again, I do mean it when I say that, like, I think the purists play a role because there's a danger in slipping away from libertarianism. And so I like the fact that we have purists who want to criticize us. But this idea that all the answers are there, I think, is also wrong. I see there's like people have been constantly smashing that hand button, so I want to let other people
Okay.
talk.
All right. So just talk about the public property thing with Zulu, and thank you for having me. I'll go to sleep now, and I hope you get converted because you sound very smart and much smarter than I gave you credit for.
All right, Zulu, did you want to jump in on any of that, or we can jump to the next hand? Up to you.
I was away at the toilet for the last bit there, so I won't be able to comment on the very last bit. So I do want to get into this notion of the government property thing. Now, this could go on very long, so perhaps we might have to cap it off without going too much in depth into it. But I think the real problem with government property, these government possessions, is there are three logical possibilities for how many people could ever own it. Right? It's either nobody owns it, one guy owns it, or some group of people own it. If nobody owns it, then clearly it can just be homesteaded. If one guy owns it, if it's like eminent domain, they just like took this guy's house or some other property or whatever, then yeah, clearly that guy, he can go back, he can say like, no, get off here, dirty Californian or whatever it is. I'm completely fine with that. But then when it comes to a group of people owning something, I think that's a logical contradiction. I don't think it's possible for a group to own anything. I can go into my proof of that if you want.
I'm not unwilling to have this discussion if it's the discussion that people want to hear. I feel like this is like a fairly well-tread libertarian argument. I would not ultimately come down on your position. I do understand it. I guess to succinctly give the counter position, if you trace, you can look at the founding of various American municipalities, and there are at least some that are roughly, maybe not perfectly, but are pretty close to, valid under libertarian contract law. 100 citizens came together and they all entered into a contract that said these are the joint rules that are going to govern our property, and only via these mechanisms, vote of property holders, are the joint rules governing our property going to be changed. The ideas of covenants are perfectly, I mean, maybe you can dispute, if you have a dispute against these, I'm certainly happy to hear it, but to me, covenants are completely valid under libertarian theory. And so I don't think they're all invalid, and I think it is a reasonable, comparable counterfactual that the park in my neighborhood is the joint property comparable to a corporation. I disagree with some of the corporate liability shielding, but the idea of a corporation itself is valid to me. The idea that a bunch of people can contract together and say, we're going to pool our money, we're going to pool our resources, and we're going to govern this entity in accordance with these rules, that seems valid to me. And so, my problem with the park is that the police that I pay for protect the homeless people who don't pay taxes for it, rather than regarding the park as unhomesteaded land. I think the counterfactual of the park in my neighborhood is that I would be in a private HOA, and and my tax money would be a voluntary contribution to my HOA to maintain the public park, and the public park would be maintained in accordance with the values of the property owners, rather than the public park being maintained in accordance with all voters, or even worse, it's maintained in accordance with civil rights law and federal interference that says the town can't kick a bum out of the park because it's a violation of, I don't know, the 14th Amendment or some bullshit. That's probably not the 14th Amendment, but some bullshit. And so this is what's offensive to me, not the idea that the park exists, because I'm always comparing things to the counterfactual of a private society. My private society, I'm happy, the money that I'm offended by is the $5,000 a year I had to pay to the public schools, not the $200 a year I pay for the park. I would probably pay the $200 a year for the park voluntarily. Okay. And so it's that's sort of how I tend to look at these things, is how distant is it from the private counterfactual. The park is much closer to me than the welfare systems in the public schools.
Sure. So perhaps there actually is some interesting ground to tread here, because obviously people have heard most of my argument for as it pertains to public property and why group ownership is impossible. That's been gone over. So, I mean, we definitely could get into it, but there are a lot of hands. But I think the interesting ground to tread here is this notion of the covenant. I think that there is a valid way to do covenants where it's, nobody's allowed to paint their house, pink or something in this neighborhood. But it has to be done purely with penalty clauses. I agree completely with the title transfer theory of contracts. So you could have it where, on the condition that you do break this rule, then you have to pay $100 to some guy, and maybe your house is even temporarily transferred to him so you can paint it a normal color. You could do that, because that's all just transferring title of property. What I don't think you can do is the sorts of rules we see where it's, collectivist societies, where it's just completely arbitrary. It's not actually, nobody's basing it in transfer of title to property. And I think that's the only valid sense of a contract. I don't think you can have a contract which says, that you can sell yourself into slavery or whatever. That's the classic example from Walter Block.
Yeah, look, I'm not trying to avoid this debate, but I think it would serve libertarians better if they found ways of explaining how their theories and their beliefs would give people more of what they want. I want a park in my neighborhood. I'm happy to pay money for my park. What my problem with my park is that there are sometimes homeless people in it who are throwing knives at trees, and that makes me want to not take my kids there. That is my problem with the park. If libertarians are going around and saying that park's unowned property, so of course homeless people can take a shit in it, like, this is just the worst way. And again, this is a consequentialist argument, but this is just the worst way to get people to like libertarians. Whereas if you can say, well, under libertarian theory, that park would be privatized, and it wouldn't have bums in it, and it would be a nice place. And of course, yeah, you would have to pay for it. You wouldn't be a free park. It wouldn't be a socialized park. Like, I'm not supporting that kind of thing. But if our ideas don't give decent people who contribute, people who are productive, people who are nonviolent, non-criminal, if our ideas don't make their lives better, we've got one hell of an uphill battle. And so I think it would be way better. And again, this is consequentialist, but I think it would be way better if we were making arguments that explain how our ideas would make these people's lives better, and not telling them, the public school, the government school is unowned property, so of course it's okay if someone wants to spray graffiti on it. Because that is just the kind of thing that's very off-putting to a lot of people. And even as a pretty hardcore libertarian, it's off-putting to even me, this idea that the property is unknown, so therefore it can be destroyed and this kind of stuff. And I think the kinds of people who are attracted to that idea are often bad people. And again, I'm not saying all of them. Some of them are just, autistic, systematic people who want to have clear rules. But some of the people, like it's a big problem that there are people who are attracted to libertarianism. And these are some of the people I try to repel with my messaging. The LPNH tries to, repel. These people are anti-civilization. They're anti-decency, and they're against the government, not because it inhibits greater civilization and greater decency and greater productivity and greater thriving, but because the government actually stops violence and people living in the dirt. And so, yeah, like, I don't know, I may be avoiding the sort of theory type discussion that you want to be having, and giving you a consequentialist argument, but it's nonetheless my argument.
So let me jump in on this real quick because I want to make sure that it's understood that I agree with you. It would be better if libertarians would stop having these quibbles about theory internally and start projecting out our message as far as, hey, this is how our society could be better if we adopted libertarian prescriptions. I couldn't agree with that messaging more. My thing is that we're being put in a place where, if libertarians are going to come out and start saying that actually it's okay to violate the non-aggression principle in these specific circumstances because of the outcomes or whatever, then yeah, you're putting me in a position where I have to disagree with you because we have a disagreement and I want to sort it out, and get the proper understanding of the theory down. So just to quick history lesson here, not a long history lesson, as far as not going a long way back. Look, when I became a libertarian or an anarcho-capitalist, I was immediately brought into the Hoppian sect of libertarianism, to where I initially agreed basically with the position that yourself and others would advocate for, that, hey, we want to live in a fully privatized society, but while that's not the case, it makes sense to have reasonable restrictions on public property. As far as I think so. The video that I saw on this was by a guy called Anglo Libertarian, who you may not have heard of. He basically made the Hoppian case, right, for why, hey, we need to have roads that have speed limits, we need to have, driver's licenses, all that kind of stuff to stop people from, flying down the highway at 160 miles an hour, high on meth or whatever, that kind of stuff. And so initially I would have agreed with you, and then later on, I obviously came into contact with Zulu and, have started moving away from that position. But I will say this, since I moved away from that position and have adopted the position that Zulu and I are advocating for now, it was never on my radar, this whole idea that we needed to make this immigration or public property in general a wedge issue within the libertarian movement. I was okay with being hey, this is just an issue. My understanding of, for instance, the Mises Caucus was, when that caucus was set up, one of the tenets of it was hey, we're not going to take a specific position on, I think, abortion and immigration, because it's just simply the case that reasonable minds within our movement can have disagreements about that, and we don't want to make it about that issue. We want to talk about the stuff that we agree on, and we want to advocate for our position and why it would be good for society as a whole to adopt our position or adopt our prescriptions, as far as what libertarians can agree on. The problem was that down the line from that, it became pretty clear that a lot of the immigration restrictionists, and not specifically yourself, but for instance, a guy and I'm going to bring up his name, Dave Smith, right, was coming out on podcasts and talking about how people like myself and Zulu are as bad as Nazis and communists for the positions that we take on this particular issue. And so from my perspective and from Zulu's perspective, the charge that you're making, as far as you guys are just too focused on the specific theory issues, and you're advocating for positions that aren't good for libertarians to advocate for. From our perspective, it's you guys forced us to take these positions and to argue for them, because you guys were the ones to pretty much point fingers here. You guys were the ones that made it a wedge issue from our perspective. We were fine with being hey, libertarianism is a coalition, and the reality is people are going to have, some disagreements over the specifics of a specific policy or whatnot. And that's fine, and we can look past that for the betterment of the movement.
And to clarify real quick, I might be misremembering, but I do believe that Dave Smith conceded to me that he drew first blood in that, making it a wedge issue.
Right. So yeah. So
look, guys, I'm not Dave Smith. I'm a free stater. I try to represent the free state movement, and even some of the free staters don't like me. So I don't even want to pretend that I'm universally speaking for the free staters. But the perspective of me and the free staters who tend to like me is that there will be some immigration, restrictionism in the state of New Hampshire should we attain our goals. I would like to have it be market-based, market-esque, but I see this as central. I just don't see a way around it. Okay, I see it as given how rare libertarian preferences are, you will not be able to sustain a libertarian society without some form of exclusion or subjugation. And we can debate which is feasible. I don't have an exact system in mind, but I take it as something as a given. And with our messaging, we're trying to attract compatible people to New Hampshire. We're not trying to fight for the libertarian movement at large. Like, quite frankly, if libertarians who disagree with us want to say, move to Georgia or wherever, we'll fully support that. Our messaging is about attracting certain people to the New Hampshire movement, and honestly, at times, about repelling another certain type. So that's our strategy. I think so. It's a mistake to lump us in with Dave or Mises or all these other groups. New Hampshire is, its own thing. I saw like 5 hands go up simultaneously when you said something. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was remarkable because they all went up at the same time. So there are definitely a lot of people who've been waiting to, speak if we want to let them say so. And I imagine they want to rant at me. Well, not rant. I imagine they want to critique or question me.
This is your struggle session, of course.
Yeah.
No, it's good. I like it. Again, I like you guys. I think it's good. I think there is a danger in being pragmatic. When you stare into the abyss, so does the abyss stare into you. And all of our guys are running as Republicans and getting elected as Republicans. They're mixing with Republicans. It makes sense. I think our guys have stayed pretty strong, to be clear, but it makes sense that we're going to get pulled a little bit that way. There's no way around it.
I will say
the average of the people they spend time with.
Running as Republican, I'm massively more forgiving of that. When somebody runs as a Republican and, they're implementing most of the libertarian policies, because they're not pretending to be libertarians. Like, they're not pretending to be like, I am the pure libertarian here.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is you become it. Look, I appreciate that Monhop and you are probably like 99th percentile. So, the polite term for, or disagreeable. The polite term is independent minded, which means that you guys are probably, it's going to take a lot. You're not just going to get rubbed off on by the people you spend time with, but what we're doing here in New Hampshire, we are winning through the Republican Party, and it's constant trading and horse trading and negotiations because we don't control the entire Republican Party. We're maybe 30-ish% of the Republican Party. Maybe we're 40-ish% on a good day. And so it's trade-offs. And these people become peers. They become friends with one another. And it's very normal for people to change their perspectives based off of who they're spending time with. And so it probably is true. Like, I was more of an anarchist before moving to New Hampshire. It's a weird kind of consequence. But like, I was closer to your guys' positions 10 years ago before I moved here than I am now living here. And I'm just being, honest about that, for better or worse.
All right. So let me just tie a bow on my point, and then we'll go to You Can Always Change Your Mind as our first hand that we go to. So look, my point was basically, and I brought up Mises and Dave not to conflate them with your position, but just simply as an example of what I'm talking about. Yeah, look, you said there, immigration is fundamental. And that's fine. If it's fundamental and, it's really important for you to take that position, that's fine. But then, from my perspective, the blame shouldn't be shifted on us for being the ones that, counter-signal that or bring up the opposing arguments. Like, if that's the issue that you guys want to talk about, that's fine. But to be clear, it's you guys bringing it up, not us. So, it's not our fault for for the issue becoming front and center of the discourse within libertarianism. With that being said, I'll go to You Can Always Change Your Mind. Please jump in, my friend.
Yeah, hello. I was wondering, Zulu, you said people voting for socialism, that would be an aggression. Do you hold to that? And how would that be aggression?
So perhaps not like, it's possible that you're just kind of, you're not paying attention. This is probably the case of most people. I'm not like super radical in voting or anything like that. And maybe you're just not paying attention. It's like, the family party, I'll vote for them. Fuck it. That's probably not aggression. But I think the people who are like socialist activists, and they're coming in, they're like, we need more. I think they are definitely trying to bring about socialism. And it would be very much like if I started the rape party. And I was like, well, I want to bring about rape, where every attractive woman, they get raped by me personally. And I'm going to try and convince the police officers to go along with the rape party. I think that would be aggression already. I'm already committing the aggression when I'm trying to organize the rape society. I don't actually have to wait until you don't have to wait until my penis is inserted into a woman before you can go, no, fuck off. Like, I'm going to prevent you from doing that.
This is going to be an amazing out of context clip. Can I just say that much?
Of course, I got to give the clip farmer something.
It's a threat, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's a threat.
All right. I'll have to think about that. I have also a question for Jeremy. So you said something about cooperating with ICE, that New Hampshire or your party, I don't know, is cooperating with ICE. How does that make it easier for libertarians to move to New Hampshire?
I'm not aware of. I have heard rumors of that you can buy a gay marriage for Bitcoin. But I'm not aware of libertarians moving here as sort of illegal immigrants and coming here and being productive or contributive members. I'm not saying it's never happened, but for the most part, the people who are here, I'm not saying exclusively, but predominantly, the people who are here illegally in the United States are not making America more libertarian. Okay. And so I just think this idea that it's not a quote nat violate. I just don't care. I just don't care. Like, I'm not more free when someone illegally comes here from from third world country. That does not increase my freedom. It doesn't. Okay. Part of freedom comes from our ability to address each other in civilized ways, in court systems. I can trust that if I have a conflict with my neighbor, or that if I get in a car accident on my street, that this is someone who is a member of my society, that they're identifiable, and that we can resolve our conflict in a court. Okay. If someone is here and they're not a citizen, a lot of the trust of a lot of the high trust world that I want to live in goes out the window. Okay. So I just don't buy this is like, I just don't buy this argument at all.
I've seen like on there've been many I've seen on Reddit and such who have like moved out of New Hampshire because of like the Free State Project and people with libertarian ideas. So like think even on the consequentialist side, like I think they just will naturally move out, those who are like hate liberty and such, and it will attract naturally those who are for liberty. I don't see why you need ICE and aggression to do that. Like,
I look, that's the hope. I think it would be great. I think it would be great if New Hampshire's reputation and cultural values simply repel these people. But I think to the extent that you want to repel them, you need to act a little bit like LP&H does. Like part of the problem is, okay, so if you have this form of liberty, especially if you have this form of liberty that's non-judgmental, and I don't think liberty is inherently judgmental or non-judgmental, by the way, so I'm not trying to say there's a right answer here, but let's say you have this non-judgmental form of liberty. Okay, liberty creates prosperity. I think even my haters can agree here that liberty creates prosperity. Prosperity attracts people, and those people that prosperity attracts are not going to necessarily share your values. This is a real problem, okay? And so the best case scenario is you can have liberty, you can create prosperity, and because your liberty is culturally loud and culturally judgmental, you can use culture to keep people out. I think that would be a dream scenario. I would hope that works. But if it doesn't work, then you're going to have to do something else.
Yeah, but doesn't it already work? So why do you have to cooperate with ICE already? I don't see.
Well,
why.
it's not clear that it does work. This is an open question. Like,
Well,
there's
well,
no
it seems that
look.
there are the like leftists who are moving out
Look,
already.
we can debate to what degree America was ever a libertarian nation. I would guess that people would largely agree that America was more libertarian in the past than it is today. And one of the, and so it's important to understand, why did the Constitution, why did these mechanisms not work? And part of the reason these mechanisms didn't work is people were able to come along and read the same words. Like, think of the Constitution as saying, like, imagine the original Constitution was, no one will aggress against anyone else. Like, imagine the Constitution attempted to encode the NAP. Okay? Look, the Constitution attempted to encode that the federal government wouldn't regulate interstate commerce. And then Supreme Court justices said, when you grow wheat on your own property, that's interstate commerce because it affects the prices in other areas. You can't do this. Like, this is, if we want to learn one thing from the extent, like, and I think America is still the greatest nation in the world, so I don't want to call it too big of a failure, but like, to the extent that America has failed, which I think it also has to some degree, it's failed because the founders were naive about the ability to write down words and have those words be interpreted by future peoples and future generations in the same way that they meant those words. And so the correction to make is, you have to ensure that you're selecting for people in your polity that interpret words in the same way that you do. Okay?
I think you do.
There's no getting around this.
The correct philosophy and spreading the right ideas.
Sure, but this idea that you can just spread the right ideas, again, I think this is somewhat true and somewhat false. I believe that I could, if you gave me control over the school systems, I believe I could indoctrinate a lot more people into becoming libertarians. I also believe there are some people who I could never indoctrinate into being libertarians, in the same way that I went into a generic public school in America and came out as a rabid libertarian. I was a rabid libertarian at like 16. Okay, so it didn't take much of a taste of libertarianism for me to buy it and believe in it and be like, all the stuff I'm being taught, not all the stuff I'm being taught in school, my physics classes were fine, but a lot of the stuff I was being taught in school was a bunch of crap, and so, like, but that's partially because my psychology was naturally attuned. I was a natural libertarian.
Yeah,
and
you were a remnant at the time.
Yeah,
and that's people we care about. We don't care about all of them, and I think they will slowly change their mind. Most of them, at least. Well,
I don't know if it's most. I hope that it's most. But
you need a small minority that have the right ideas, and they will, as you see in New Hampshire, even they will influence other people there and slowly change the views over time.
I have a friend of mine texting me saying that I'm supposed to tell everyone on this call that Theory is gay, and so I'm just honoring him by saying that out loud.
Then you can call me Chase Oliver.
I'm not sure I agree. But
it'll be a lot easier to get a green card marriage in that
I'm not
case.
saying I agree. Yeah, no. Look, I think the Theory people, I think they actually do have value. I think like but the Theory people have to be offering our, and it's funny to call ourselves the pragmatists now, but I think we kind of are in some ways. And it's like, look, if the Theory people want to be critiquing us and saying, hey, here's a way to do this that's more compliant with theory, like, I really am for it. I think it is reasonable to be concerned, that we drift away from our ideals and we just become, conservatarians or whatever. And so I'm not opposed to some, critiquing, but the critiquing has to come from, in my view, it has to be, here's a better way to do this. Here's a more compatible way to do this. When it's just, you shouldn't do this. I think you need
a rock solid foundation, but if not, you don't have no ground to stand on, and everything just slides wherever. I think the worst, the worst. Sorry, I'm a bit tired.
No, I get it. Look, the best argument, in my opinion, the best argument, for sort of strict deontological libertarianism, in my opinion, this is the argument that makes me the most sympathetic, So maybe it's not the best. It's the one that works the best on me. I'll say it that way. The one that works the best on me is, well, it's dangerous to have a government and a justice system that starts considering consequences, because once you consider consequences, you can justify all kinds of things. And so,
Exactly.
well, okay. And I agree with this argument to some degree, but it's important to understand that this is still a consequentialist argument to some degree, right? Like we want a justice system that is largely, predominantly, or even exclusively deontological, because of the consequences of having a justice system that is predictable and legible, and we can anticipate the decisions they would make, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I sense there's some nerds on here, like people who read things and so on. There's a paper that I read that changed my mind. Well, didn't change my mind, it opened my eyes a little bit. I read it 10 or so years ago. It's called Crystals and Mod in Property Law. And it's a 30 or 40-year-old legal paper. I think it's a fairly seminal paper in sort of legal history. And it traces through the history of property law and how property law actually oscillated between so-called crystal rules, very hard edge, you could think of these as deontological rules, and muddy rules, which was, we had a court and a jury, and the rules were interpreted by people, and the only way to anticipate outcomes was decisions by people. And I've come to believe that sort of virtue does lie at least a little bit here in the middle. Even if we want to be hedged deontological, and I still find aspects of deontological thinking very appealing, I think that if you have a completely crystallized rule set with no ability for human interpretation and no ability for humans to change it, you have created an attack surface for bad actors. You've created a system in which someone can, and look, I was the victim of this stuff, so it's kind of odd to be defending it. But there is a sense in which, like, sometimes you do need rules to be interpreted by people. Okay, all right, wait, hold on. I don't mean to be talking for too much, but I'm gonna keep doing it anyway. Here's another example of this. Okay, I call this like the public parks problem, right? So how do you legislate? How do you create clear-eyed rules, crystal rules, for who can and cannot be in a public park? Because there's a bunch of rules that govern public parks in my neighborhood and most neighborhoods in the US, I imagine most neighborhoods around the world, that are effectively don't do bum-like behavior, okay? Why is it illegal to drink in public parks in the United States? Generally, to detract from bums, okay? We don't actually want these rules to stop a couple from having a bottle of wine and having a nice picnic. But because the rules have to be written in a crystal form, we write rules like no drinking in public parks. It would actually theoretically be better to have an agent who can go around making subjective decisions, whose subjective decisions match the subjective decision making of the types of people on this podcast, right? Like, what I want is an agent who can say, you're a bum, get out of the park. You're okay, you can drink in the park. But this is the opposite of crystal rules. Okay, it is very difficult to create crystallized rules that keep bums out of a park.
Yeah, I mean, it can't just be a random rule.
Yeah.
Like we didn't just come up with the nap just from nothing. We had to ground it in human nature. So it's not like deontological in like a priori sense. We have to ground it in reality. So I guess Zulu can pick it up from there. I'm a bit tired, so.
Well, I suppose, before we get to the other hands, I will say, like, Super Boys in chat actually has summed up that the NEP is absolute and private property rules are discretionary within that boundary, and that can cover your desire for fuzziness. And I suspect you'd probably agree with that.
I'm inclined to agree with that, but the problem is that, like, okay, who's this idea that it's absolute? Again, I find this appealing, so I'm not trying to reject it entirely. But okay, who's adjudicating disputes at the borders? Like, you you still have some need for systems. Like people are going to have disputes. And so even if you say, oh, well, inside of private property, it can be completely discretionary.
Sorry, just to
Okay.
clarify, Jeremy, when you say at the border, do you mean like in the margins, like at like edge cases? Is that, or you mean like literally like at the borders of the United
No,
States?
sorry. That's a good question. No, so in this case, I meant like literally at the border of two private property owners.
Oh, okay,
like
yeah,
they can
okay,
still
sure,
have-
yeah.
yeah. So like, okay, two private property owners have a dispute. Like they're still going to go to a court of some kind, right? I don't mean necessarily the current court system. Like we can imagine whatever anarcho-capitalist utopia you want to imagine. There are still men who are going to adjudicate the dispute.
Definitely
There's
no women.
getting
Definitely
around.
no women are going to adjudicate the disputes. Only men.
That was a gender inclusive men. Although I bet it will be predominantly male. But like there is no getting around men adjudicating disputes. There's no getting around it. And so whatever system you imagine, you have to imagine a system that says the men who are adjudicating disputes would adjudicate disputes in ways roughly analogous to the ways that I would like them to. Okay. You might not literally be in power, but you want people who have the power to adjudicate disputes to be adjudicating disputes in ways that are roughly comparable to the ways that you yourself would adjudicate them. Okay. That is the closest you can get to utopia. And so whatever you're thinking about politically, you have to be thinking about how does my dispute resolution happen in a way that is roughly comparable to if I were the king, if I were the dispute resolver, that there's the resolutions would happen in ways roughly comparable to the ways that I would make them. You have to be thinking about this. There's no way around it.
So I will say, I agree completely that this is an important problem to solve. But I will clarify, this is something which I got from Kinsella, which I 100% agree with, that there has to be a distinction between the judge and the jurist. That is, like, the jurist, people like me, like, this is my specialty. I like just sitting in the armchair and working out the philosophy and giving these objective rules. And then, yeah, you do have to pass that on to the judge at some point, who has a literal case in front of him. And I think it's an engineering problem to get judges who are, going to judge correctly. And that's why we have things like markets. And it is important. That's definitely very important. But that's downstream, I think, of the philosophy. If you have the philosophy in place, you will tend to get better judges.
So, and I will say this as well, like Zulu and I, and I'm only going to speak for the two of us, we aren't rationalists. So we're not going to come here and tell you like, hey, we can figure out, we can sit in our armchair and figure out exactly how every single dispute you could ever possibly come up with in any specific case is going to be resolved exactly. Like we're just not going to be able to do that because there's an infinite number of ways that a specific dispute could manifest. And so, yeah, it's going to be up to a judge to, we're going to set down the law. Okay, like you ought not initiate conflicts. Okay, so how is that? How and the corollaries of that as far as private property and whatnot. And like, yeah, it's going to be up to the judge to figure out in any specific case how that law applies. Like, we can agree that yeah, there's gonna be challenges as far as obviously, as you said, getting the judges in place that are going to enforce it in a way that we would agree with. And even in specific case by case basis, he's like, okay, how does the law apply in this like hyper complex case where, there's a dispute that goes back 300 years and, multiple different parties involved? Like, yeah, that case is going to, probably be extremely difficult to figure out. And the judges are going to, in some cases, they're going to err and make mistakes. We understand that. I think that that's like not a question per se that, as Zulu said, the jurist is setting out to resolve. That's just something that's going to have to be figured out on the ground. And yeah, there's going to be errors that are going to be made, and we need to be reasonable about how we go about there needs to be considerations made for how we set about ensuring that the people that are in places where they can make these adjudications are going to make them in accordance with the values that we hold or the principles that we align with, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I don't know how many, and I feel bad. I've seen like a lot of hands, and I really feel this urge to let them speak. But like, I don't know how many people here are parents, but even if you're not, a parent, you're probably familiar with the idea of like, when two kids like, I'm not touching you, right? At which point does a child initiate aggression against, another child? Children, and maybe it's because my kids are also trolls like me. They're pretty clever about this. They'll find all kinds of ways to push the envelope, and and this idea that there are these objective bright line rules at which point a child has aggressed against another, and of course you try to create them, but it can get a little bit fuzzy. And what's remarkable is even without articulating all of these bright line rules, your children, assuming your judgments are relatively consistent with one another. Now, if you're a schizo parent, this probably doesn't work, but like, my wife and I we might not even have written down all of the rules, but we're pretty consistent with our past judgments. Your children will start to intuit roughly what the rules are without these rules all being, spelled out, because we are consistent in our interpretations, even if they're being decided in a somewhat ad hoc fashion. They're consistent with past judgments. And so we didn't write down all of the rules of what constitutes aggression inside of our family, but my children from past judgments can intuit with high accuracy what is or is not aggression against the other child. And so I'm not trying to reject this desire for these hard edge rules that are all written out. But what I want to emphasize is that there's no getting around some of these softer judgments. And once you recognize that there's no getting around some of these softer judgments, you really need to think about, how am I making sure that the people making the softer judgments are fair, consistent, and making judgments in ways that are roughly comparable to the ways that I would also make soft interpretive judgments.
Yeah, I'm not going to take any issues with that in general, and we will start getting through some of these hands. I will say, just like as far as the hands go, like I understand people are waiting a long time and all that kind of thing, but at the end of the day, my goal here is to have a lively conversation, and the speakers that come up are in furtherance of that. And we do have like something, I think, close to 200 people on YouTube that are also watching this and whatnot. So I'm considerate of their goals as or their objectives as far as having in listening to a lively conversation. So
I do want to check, Jeremy, do you have like a hard time limit or anything?
A hard time limit? I mean, I have dinner waiting for me downstairs. So I don't know, like 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay, sure. Well, we'll whip through some of these hands then, and get through everything. Because I do also have to wrap up at some point probably longer than 45 minutes, but not too much longer after that. So anyway, we'll go to the hands. We'll start off with Will May. Will, thanks, and to everyone, thanks for being so patient. I appreciate people not just like trying to jump in and speak up. So anyway, Will, please go ahead.
And please keep it short.
Will, we cannot hear you. If you're trying to speak, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Okay, I'm gonna mute his mic for the time being. Will, I'll let you jump in as the next speaker after this one. Or do you want to try again real quick? Jump up again. Try again real quick. Yeah, no, still not working. I'm going to mute you again. We'll go to Fountainhead Forum. I'm not sure exactly who was next, but we'll go to Fountainhead Forum first, and I'll keep trying to let you up and have a go, but your mic's just not working. So I'm not sure exactly what the fix is going to be for that. But Fountainhead Forum, please go ahead.
First, to respond to the earlier comment about anarcho-capitalists being incels, you really should look into seeing some of Javier Milei's girlfriends. But getting on to the more important question, Jeremy, you seem to have a determinist outlook. I mean, you talk a lot about, I mean, do you really think that all things are determined at birth, that we're, I mean, if your father's an alcoholic, does that mean the sons have to be alcoholics? Because I sometimes get that impression from you, because I think there's a lot of things that I'm not a blank slate person, but I also think there might be things that are determined early in our lives that are, the product of what I would call low level subconscious programming. I mean, when I was in the first grade, I noticed I was better at math than everybody else. Now, is that because of genes, or is that because of somebody else? Something else? I don't know. But I think if we deny that people have free will, we can't really. I mean, that a basis of a free society has to say that people have agency. So, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I'm not wholly determinist, but even your own story, I think, shares that clear. Like, could you have been an NBA player with different experiences? Like, no, like there's no scenario in which either you or me could have become NBA players. There's none, right? There's no. I mean, I don't. Yeah, and so like you, I was also good at math at an early age, and here we are, decades later, on a call talking about libertarianism. I wonder if there's something. I wonder if there's something going on there. So look, environment matters. If you and I had been locked in a basement as children, and no one talked to us, and food was thrown down the stairs, clearly we wouldn't have turned out the same way. So there's no question that environment matters as well. Part of why I live in New Hampshire is because I believe that having a community, having my values reinforced by my children's peer group is especially important to their outcomes. And it's part of why I live here, because I want my values to be reinforced not just inside the household, but to be reinforced outside the household in their education and from their teachers and from their peers. And so I do believe that these things matter. It's literally part of why I live here. But I think that genetics also matter a good deal as well.
Okay. Yeah. And I understand too. I mean, one of my big questions about the Free State Project, my grandfather walked 2 miles to school each way, and nowadays they'd say, "Oh, you're abusing him." I mean, I hope New Hampshire is very good on the free range kids issue, because that to me is just something that I can't wrap my head around anymore. Teenagers.
I'll tell you. I mean, I don't know if this is a pro New Hampshire story or an anti New Hampshire story, but I'll tell you a short one, which is that my son, when he gets upset at me, he likes to find the hardest place in the house for me to find him. And he discovered that he could go out his window and onto the roof, and then go around the corner from the window onto a side roof where it's impossible to see him. And so we had a fight last summer, and he went out there, and he was just sort of stewing on the roof. And we generally let him stay out there for a little bit until he chills out or whatever, and we can talk again. And someone in my neighborhood called the police. And so police officer shows up at my door. He says, he knocks on the door, and I say, "Yeah, hello, can I help you?" And he says, "Are you aware your son is on the roof?" I say, "Yep." And then we just sort of look at each other for a couple of seconds. And then I say, "Anything else?" and the police officer left. So, I don't know if that's a pro New Hampshire story or an anti New Hampshire story, but that story popped into my head when you're asking that, question.
No.
So yeah, I think it's important that we have a culture here that allows children to be, relatively independent.
Well, I can go to Peru and I see kids rowing canoes at 6 years old, and they're not wearing life jackets, and these are on big rivers, but because one of the problems, because now we're in a situation, I think teenagers 50 years ago were probably more mature than 20 somethings are now. But anyway, that's all I wanted to bring up. Maybe I should get up there to, Jeremy, one thing, and you were certainly right about migrations. I mean, Jeremy, I have a shirt, and there's a shirt you can buy down here that says, "Don't California my Texas." and they're all legal. But that is unfortunately the problem. You're always going to attract people who, when you have prosperity, you're going to attract people, and they may not understand why the prosperity is. But I also think America, it seems like to me, a lot of people just want to blame immigrants for problems that they've really done to America. I mean, but anyway, that's really all I got to say. So yeah, sometimes Jeremy, sometimes I really hate some of your tweets, but some of your tweets I absolutely love. I mean, like the tweet about the kid and the flat, when you're explaining to your kid after you have a flat tire, I thought that was I love that tweet.
Look, you don't look. I'm a loudmouth on purpose to draw attention to New Hampshire. You don't have to agree with me on 100% of things to come to New Hampshire to check out New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah.
I assure you, plenty of the people here who like me and get along with me still think I'm an idiot on some subjects, and so I'm not the kind of person who demands compliance or this kind of thing. We're libertarians. We're going to disagree with each other, and so it's perfectly fine to disagree with me on some things. I think libertarians should check out New Hampshire, even if they do. So,
I've often said too that I think sometimes just living in a very mountainous place makes people tough.
Because sorry for cutting you off, but I think we should probably move on to the other hand.
Should move on.
I'm very cognizant of the.
Okay, check out my show. I've done 100 shows talking about melee. Bye bye.
Well, thank you very much, Fountainhead Forum. I think. Perhaps we keep it to like not so much of a back and forth, but maybe like a question for either Jeremy or myself or somebody else, and then like a response, and then if you want to follow up on that, then I don't know, contact the person you want to talk to.
Yeah, I think we'll go one question and then follow up, and then we'll try and keep things moving unless we have more time at the end, and then people can jump back through. Anyway, we'll go to again, like I'm just going to start calling people out. I don't know which order you put your hands up in, but just go. Like, don't tell me like, oh, actually this other guy was before me. Just go. We'll go to Acorn next, and then we'll hit the rest of the hands, I promise.
Hey guys, I'm quite tired today, so I don't have too much to say either. I've just got 2 points I noted down when listening to Jeremy earlier. So the first point is that Jeremy said earlier that he thinks that it is a NAP violation to immigrate to America. And I'm not too sure like how well Jeremy actually understands like praxeology and what aggression actually means. So I'm wondering if you can like explain step by step how this is an aggression to immigrate. And the second point is earlier Jeremy says that he always compares things to the ideal private society, but the private society is not the primary, the NAP is.
Yeah, look, part of the point of just saying, like, I think it's I don't actually I think it's a debatable claim, but part of the point of making that claim is to make you deal with it. Okay? If there's nothing inherent if you're like, oh, we should just follow the NAP. Okay, I'm in your society and I say the NAP means this. I say it's a NAP violation if you don't make me lunch every day. Okay? And I try to get as many people to come and live in our society who also believe this. Like, that's literally what they believe the NAP is. And if you put them on a jury, that's what they'll say the NAP is. And if they're a judge, that's how they'll interpret the NAP. Like, you can say it's just the NAP, but there's no getting around the fact that you need a population of people that share your interpretation of what the NAP means. There's no getting around this. You either need to have a privatized justice system that denies political participation, that denies participation in justice to those who don't share your definitions, or you need to exclude people who don't share your definitions. Like, this is like borderline tautological, okay? And this is the point of me biting the bullet and just saying, yeah, it's a NAP violation if someone immigrates and degrades the NAP. Okay, do I believe that entirely? Yeah, look, that's a debatable argument. I'm making that argument partially to be provocative, to get you to understand that there's no getting around needing people with compatible interpretations. It's just unavoidable. And where you go from there, I think is tricky. I'm not here like a lot of libertarians like to go around and be like, I have all the answers, follow me. I don't claim to have all the answers. I just see a lot of libertarians being, I think, a little bit naive, and my solution is to troll them to questionable results.
So let me jump in on this real quick because I think, and I want to also hear Zulu's thoughts on this. And then we will get back to the hands, and I will let Acorn follow up if Acorn, if you want to. But I think we've been dancing around this a few times, or this issue or this disagreement a few times, and I want to actually like name it and discuss it a bit. And that's that, Jeremy. I think you're adopting like a nominalist view, right? And I've seen Zulu's chat on YouTube has been like going off about this every time it comes up. So I wanted to bring it up. But like when Acorn says that it's the non-aggression principle or it's the NAP, he's not like just like saying like it's not just the words the non-aggression principle that he's alluding to. He's alluding to like an underlying concept or like general principle that he uses the words non-aggression principle or the acronym NAP to describe. And the general underlying concept is that you ought not initiate conflicts against people. And that describes a specific set of actions. It's not the words. The words themselves are just describing a concept, right? And I'm kind of like bumbling my way through this. But my point is that, like, yeah, you can say that people are going to have different definitions of what constitutes a conflict or an aggression. But then those people are just going to be wrong because they're wrongly interpreting what the non-aggression principle means, because it isn't just a collection of words that you like have no underlying concept. Like the NAP describes a concept that we can understand and that is true, right, from our perspective. It's not just like a collection of words. And I wanted to get Zulu to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say real quick, like apply it to any other science, because I think law and ethics are sciences. You know, would you say like, well, I mean, you know, some people might have a different definition of cells. So biologists, they're in a big conundrum there because somebody might say a cell is this, somebody might say a virus is that. You know, the physicist, somebody might say an atom is such and such, whereas it's actually this thing. Well, like there's an actual underlying reality here, and that's why I'm comparing it to natural sciences, because I think there is an actual underlying reality that, given the nature of man, that certain things are proper to him. Now, people might diverge from that underlying nature, but that's why you have to have the proper philosophy in place. If you have the proper metaphysics and epistemology, then it becomes pretty much impossible for somebody to promulgate incorrect concepts further up the tree. If everything else below it is all kosher, then you're not going to be able to have these diversions taking hold.
But what does it mean to have them in place? What do you mean by that?
For the correct philosophy in place, well, you got to convince people of the correct philosophy, of the correct metaphysics, of the correct epistemology, the correct legal theory, so on and so forth.
Yeah, look, and my answer here again would be like, this stuff is really tough. If even if you get into, you know, the sciences, if for some reason there were a bunch of people, you know, who wanted to get, you know, physics degrees who denied the concept of gravity, or a bunch of people who wanted to get, you know, biology degrees who, you know, denied evolution or whatever, like, yeah, it would be hard. Like, yeah, scientists do need to gatekeep to some degree. I think they haven't faced you know, the same threats in the same way, but yeah, I just don't see a way around it. Like, you can say that the NAP is clear about X or Y, but I do not see how you can produce these outcomes in the real world without having some concern for the proportion of people in your polity that share those interpretations. It seems unavoidable.
Well, I definitely would say do be concerned about it, but I don't think that's the job for the jurist. Like, it is concerning if a bunch of people are trying to pretend to be physicists, but they don't understand what gravity is or anything like that. Yeah, that is concerning, and you know, this is why it's concerning to me when a bunch of people are claiming to be jurists and representing libertarianism. And you know, I'm definitely not saying this about you, by the way, but you know, there are people I've attacked before where they don't understand these concepts, and I have a problem with that.
But part of what I see, and again, I don't want to claim to speak for the whole free state movement, but I at least, you know, what I see as a free stater and what I think the free staters who like me tend to see is like this way of thinking about the world is a little bit unusual. And we don't think that makes it wrong. I still believe it's completely correct. I believe libertarians are the most ethical people in the world. I believe libertarians are moral, you know, are more moral and tend to be better people and so on and so forth. But I want to achieve it in the real world, you know, with every bone in my body. I don't want to be a philosopher. Okay. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to make it happen. And I appreciate the role of the philosophers, and I don't mind talking to the philosophers, and I'm happy to, you know, correct myself from time to time. I'm not trying to be the head philosopher, or even a philosopher. I'm trying to be an actualizer. I'm trying to be an entrepreneur. I'm trying to bring something into reality. And so if I hear philosophers telling me things that seem incompatible, I'm going to be dismissive of them. You know, if I can come together with a philosopher and find a more pure way of actualizing the thing, I'm in. Okay. Don't think I like love the idea of ICE or whatever. Look, I would love better solutions. I would love solutions that were more local. I would love more diversity. You know, I would love all kinds of things. I can imagine all kinds of things that could be better. Okay. But I'm here to actualize. Okay. And so when I hear, you know, where I think the conflict comes from is like, you know, when I hear a philosopher type or an ethicist type, you know, kind of saying, well, that's just not allowed. And I'm like, well, I don't care. I just don't care. I just don't care. I'm sorry. You can not trust me or not like me or whatever. But like, it doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't hit me. Okay. I want to solve the problem. All right. And so, you know, people who are, you know, complaining about us or our takes when we're trying to solve this problem in the real world, like libertarians have got to come to grasp with the fact that our way of thinking about the world is rare. We should still be striving to achieve our ideology in the real world. I'm a deep believer in that. But if we're not willing to acknowledge that our perspectives are a little bit unusual, I think that's a dangerous path. And so what we're trying to do is achieve as much of the ideology as possible, squaring it with the reality that our preferences and dispositions are a little bit unusual.
Zulu, did you want to get into theory practice dichotomy and or arrow regression, or did you want to like keep things rolling up?
We should probably keep things rolling. I don't want to, you know, Jeremy's got to go like imminently, basically.
Yeah.
We got to keep it.
We'll get through these hands, and then maybe we can discuss this stuff further later on or in another. I mean, we've discussed this stuff so many times on your streams in particular, but
Yeah.
okay. So we'll get to some more hands. I want to go to Roostame. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. We'll go to Roostame, and then we'll go to Atalol's. Actually, just real quick before that, I do apologize. Acorn, we did offer everyone the chance to for a quick follow-up. So Acorn, if you wanted to follow up at all, please go ahead. But also, yeah, please make it brief.
I just want to say that I'm mainly in libertarianism for the philosophy, and I can respect Jeremy for what he's trying to do in the world. And I mean, I'm really, really autistic when it comes to philosophy, but I can be like a really chill, live and let live person in real life. So I think that Jeremy is a force for good in the world, but I'm just not too interested in. But basically, I don't mean any disrespect, Jeremy, but from what you said so far, your understanding of libertarianism sounds kind of normie-like, especially since you don't seem to have a very philosophical understanding of what aggression actually means, and like the way that Rothbard or Hopper defines it. But just I just want to say that I don't mean any disrespect, and keep doing what you're doing in the world, but I strongly suggest that you eventually do come around to the philosophy.
Sure. All right. Thanks for that, Acorn. We'll go to Rooster May now, and then Atulol's after that. But Rooster May, please go ahead.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, especially to Jeremy, that something I've said a lot before. If you're in the Libertarian Party, you might have heard me say this on the Discord a lot, but the we is only a group of eyes, right? The we is not something that has its own agency or desires, or that has its own rights or anything like that. So all questions need to be asked from the perspective of the I, right? What rights do I have, and thus what rights do other people have? What actions can I take, and thus what can all the other I's take, right? So the core concept in libertarianism is kind of selfishness, right? Selfishness is good, and so once you've fully explored the I, right, all questions about about me and about all the other I's, then you've fully explored society. And that's because society is only a label that we apply to a group of I's. So you can't skip the I and go straight to what's good for everyone, what's good for society, what's good for us, right? You hear communists say that a lot, right? The us, the we. But so what is good for I is always good for society. So whenever you find yourself arguing about borders or public property or any other like social issue, you need to ask yourself whether you're thinking about it from a collectivist standpoint, from the we, or whether an individualist standpoint from the I. So that's it. That's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I think that's to some degree true and to some degree false. So it is true. You're something that libertarians absolutely recognize, and part of the reason I strongly consider myself a libertarian still is I am very appreciative of individualism and free markets, and the fact that it's the classic Adam Smith. It is not out of benevolence that the baker wakes up at 6 a.m. to bake bread. Right, the baker wakes up at 6 a.m. to bake bread, or 5 a.m. to bake bread out of self-interest. Right, he wants to make money. He wants to sell bread to other people. At the same time, I think, and I'm going to guess you agree with this one, you can, of course, say, well, it's in my self-interest to consider myself a good person. But there's all kinds of activities that are theoretically self-interested. If I'm in the woods and no one is watching, why shouldn't I litter? Why should I return my shopping cart? Why not just leave it on the island and someone else, the store can go and get it? Why should I it's not in my self-interest to spend 15 seconds of my time to bring that shopping cart back. And again, there is this way of squaring it. You can say, oh, well, it's in your self-interest to consider yourself a good person. But that starts to look like, considering society a little bit, and so I'm not suggesting that the considerations of society legitimate, circumscribing your behavior. But I think that if you introspect a little bit, you'll realize that you do have, at least if you're the kind of person I want in New Hampshire, you do have, and I think this is true of most libertarians, you do have some concern for society. You don't litter. You do return the shopping cart. If you notice that, you're given incorrect change, you give them the money back. And this is, to me, this is part of being a decent person. And so I do think there is some degree to which we live in a society. I'm not suggesting that this should be an act of government, but I will say that personally, I feel an ethical obligation to attempt to leave the world better than I found it. I feel blessed that I was born into the world where all these people who came before me manifested all these things that I, now get to receive. And I would feel better about myself if I at least didn't make it worse and hopefully made it a little bit better. That's not a rejection of individualism, but it is a suggestion that, pure self-interest, at least pure selfishness, may not be capturing the whole picture.
You know, you got a
Mate,
lot
if
of
you wanna come back from that real
objectivists
quick,
in the call, so you might have just pissed off the audience there.
Well,
Yeah.
the objective tend to just square the circle by saying, "Oh, well, it's in your self-interest to consider yourself a good person." Like that's if an objectivist wants to offer a different answer, I'm happy to hear it. But that's generally the counter argument I've heard from objectivists, which is, "Well, it's in your self-interest to think that you're good, and that's why
Yeah,
you
it's
would turn the
self-esteem.
shopping cart." But yeah.
I
Yeah,
will
so-
perhaps contradict Monhop. I mean, how much longer do you have, Jeremy?
Yeah, we can. I don't know. We can keep going. I do want to also. There's a comment here that Monhop shared that I did think was at least worth addressing from Feet and Liberty, because I did think this was a good comment.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
About the
I can read it out if you want,
externalities of-
and I'll.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
I don't know if you're. Go ahead. You can read it.
yeah, cool. All right, we got there. Kauffman brought up negative externalities and risks, but does people having children not involve externalities and risks? You cannot guarantee your children are going to be libertarians or peaceful people.
Yeah, it does. So, like, children come with risks of both negative and positive externalities. I would say that on average, children have positive externalities because the average person, or at least the mean of all people, rather than accepting the average. So rather than the median, no, I guess the average person is the correct thing. The median person may not make the world better, although they probably do. The average of all people certainly does make the world better, right? That's why we're not living in the dirt. And that's why, it's hundreds of thousands or millions of people whose combined innovation and efforts allow us to be, talking over the internet right now. And so it is the sort of expectation of a person is above average, but I'm happy to bite the bullet and say that it is conceivable that some of my children may have to leave a free New Hampshire one day. I don't think that's an impossible, scenario. I would hope that it's none of them, but I think that it is absolutely necessary that at least at times, again, this is clearly true. Like, what if my child was a murderer, right? Of course they would have to go, God forbid. And so it is not I'm not, happy to bite the bullet and say, yeah, of course, some descendants of free staters, some minority of them, will likely be incompatible, and we would hope that they would self-select out. But if we saw that they weren't, it could be necessary that some people have to go. There has to be some. You have to be looking for some kind. I'm not looking for complete, homogeny. I think it's, we're still libertarians. We're going to be tolerant of some amount of disagreement, but there's some disagreements that are going to be, too far. And so I think it is fine to say that, some descendants of libertarians might not be compatible with the libertarian society. So I'm willing to bite that bullet.
I will say I'm enjoying how in successive statements, Jeremy's managed to piss off objectivists and then now every single Austrian economist by talking about people as having objective value in this sense.
I'm gonna bring the libertarian movement together by getting them all to hate me, and in doing so, I will finally unite the libertarian.
Yeah, I mean, look, just quickly, are you aware of what like the Austrian critique of this concept of externalities would be?
In this case, probably not.
I mean, more broadly, like the Austrians are going to take an idea, an issue with the idea that you can quantify value in this sense. Like everything has, like anything you can point to could, in theory, have a positive or negative externality. It's totally up to the perspective of whichever agent is being affected by it to determine whether it has an externality or not, and to what extent, and whether it's positive or negative or not. Like, I don't think you can objectively determine that something has a positive or negative externality.
Well, totally. Yeah. Sure. I totally agree with this. This is actually a regular argument that I have with libertarians here in New Hampshire about that externalities are subjective. Yeah, they clearly are. In some communities, playing rap music at 2 a.m. is a positive externality, and in other communities, it's a negative externality. And so, yes, these things are yeah, there's no absolute answer here, and I agree with that. The answer there I was giving was from the frame that there is some broad set of general agreement on certain values among people here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that's where Hopper, in particular, kind of that's where the concept of covenant communities kind of comes in, right? Because you need a way for societies to enforce their values to the extent that like they perceive, like broadly perceive some kind of externality to be negative. You need a way for them to be able to exclude them from being able to manifest. Anyway, we'll keep their hands rolling. Atalols, I believe I had you next, so we'll go to you, and then we will try and get Will in if his mic is working. But Atalols, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Right. Thank you for having me here. I wanted to ask Jeremy for his thought on a scenario. And I don't want to hammer too much on ethics or law because I feel like this is redundant at this point. But still, I want to point out that ethics come from man qua man, meaning from the nature and the capabilities of man, which is bound to his reality. And if we like imagine aliens came to this planet, they looked from outside, they looked at the mankind for the past 10,000 years or a million years, doesn't matter. They will immediately see that there are many different people with many different ethnicities and cultures and families or races, if you will. And no matter what you believe, like it doesn't matter if you believe all mankind came from Africa or they were born in different places, they are still different people, right? They look different, they have different cultures. And if we look at those people today, or if those aliens looked at those people today, people tend to stick to their own people. Like even in the US, I would assume in high schools and whatnot, Mexicans sit with Mexicans and the Chinese talk with the Chinese, with their own people. And this is not a postmodern or social construct. Even animals like apes prefer their own group or wolves. And humans must have had this preference because if they didn't, if humans loved each other so much, then we would all be the same skin color and we would only have like one culture, right? Humans and mankind divert from one another. So if we look at today, or what is happening, or what I think Jeremy Kauffman's main point is, that it is not natural if, say, millions of Indians travel thousands of miles to the US and or Canada, even though like China is right next to them. It is not natural that people with a different ethnicity, language, religion, and even writing come to the West, because naturally they would prefer themselves. And even here, even in the US, they prefer their own people and hire each other. So it must have been something unnatural. We can say the government definitely plays a role in importing essentially millions of foreigners with H-1B and welfare and inclusion and zoning laws and whatnot. And I was also a bit surprised by this, but then I saw a video which gave me a moment of clarity, of clairvoyance. It was a video of a black woman visiting Austria, and she was traveling in the old city, and she had absolutely zero interest in their culture, their castles and paintings. It was essentially the burning your beautiful oak door for heat meme. And this is like, I kind of realized something very interesting. So if people prefer their own people, if they prefer their own culture, isn't it like the natural, the best, and the least aggressive solution to let them go their own way, to essentially let them auto-segregate, just let them find their own culture, which they think is the best? Like, we should rather, like, isn't it best if we fight every bit of unnatural or governmental force that forces this desegregation, like the Civil Rights Act and those weird diversity, representation, pie charts, we must have 50% women bullshit, whatever. And there was this like funny argument or this funny scenario of a city which only sells the Baconator burger. The Baconator is a burger which has bacon, cheese, beef, and they don't sell any chicken. So essentially, Jews and Muslims can eat bacon, Asians are lactose intolerant, and Indians aren't allowed to eat beef. And the city essentially only has white people because only white people can eat this burger. So my question is essentially to Jeremy, this city, while this city is 100% NEP compliant and ethics and without any contradictions, even from an only consequentialist standpoint, wouldn't it be better to focus on an hospitable environment for libertarians and an absolutely hostile environment for socialists instead of focusing on borders and border collectivism and stuff?
Yeah, so I agree with that roughly completely. I could debate. I think it's a question. I think it's essentially an open question whether all this stuff plays out, quote unquote, naturally. And so therefore it becomes empirical, the degree to which immigration controls are necessary. It would obviously be preferable to have as little immigration control as possible. Ideally, not. Like that's clearly the ideal outcome. Like it's not like immigration controls are good in and of themselves. They're only good. They only become good if they present something far worse. Okay. And so that becomes the question. If you have a prosperous society, is it, will, 100 Afghanis who are way more clannish, will they come here and form an enclave in your society? And yeah, maybe you can trade with them in the market, but you can't trust them on a jury anymore because if there's another Afghan on the jury, they're not going to apply the law, fairly. And so, yeah, like, look, if you have a society with, no welfare and no handouts, and, the culture is one of self-sufficiency, and the culture is one of free speech, and everyone speaks English, and so on and so forth, and people naturally just don't select into it who aren't compatible, yeah, that's great. You obviously wouldn't need immigration controls if that's true. We just can't know that it's true. And if it's not true, then you might need immigration controls. And so, that's to me, this is an empirical question as to how far we can go. I find a lot of the ANCAP anarchist versus, and I know I'm sure I'm going to get like 7 hands and everyone's going to want to yell at me, but I to the extent to which we can go full anarcho-capitalist versus minarchist, I find these to be empirical questions. I know there are books. I've read a lot of the books, but just because someone wrote it in a book and has a good idea doesn't mean it plays out that way in reality. And so it'd be great if we can privatize the roads and privatize the courts and we don't need national defense. I think it'd be great if all of those things are true. If it turns out that the first anarcho-capitalist nation without national defense gets conquered, I think the next anarcho-capitalist aligned or inclined nation should maybe just, have some national defense. Like the idea that we can somehow know these things, I don't like that idea that we can somehow just know them. I think the books and the works of various libertarian scholars are informative. I think we should strive to get as close as we can. But I think the idea that we can, I reject the idea that we can know them.
Sure, and everyone in Zulu's chat is going to want one of us to respond to that, but I just want to keep the hands moving.
Yeah, we can't be having a big back and forth every single time.
This is probably going to be the last one. This is last question. I think I've got to go.
Sure. Yeah, sure. All right. Will, if you can speak, please go ahead. I'm going to take that as a no. Not going to lie. Will, I don't know what's happening to your mic, brother, but cannot hear you. So we'll give the last question to Abhorsen, I think it is, the guy with like the target profile picture. Please go ahead. Abhorsen, do you want to jump in at all?
I think the other one was Rational Dissident.
Yeah. 0 for 2 so far. We're doing well. Rational Dissident, you can have the last question now. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Hello. So I had I had like two questions to ask. These are pretty brief, but the first one is essentially just so the NAP is not just like a subjective, arbitrary thing that's defined by the subjective whims of whoever is making a certain claim. That would be my first, I guess, thing to ask for some clarification on, because as stated by other people as well, it's like it's not just I claim therefore. Like you can't just claim that someone is violating or aggressing upon you through arbitrary means. Like for example, it's not entirely subjective or up to the whims of whoever is making a claim. It's not really a matter of I said therefore. And I think my second point.
Let's do these one at a time. Let's do this one at a time, because I don't think there's getting around the fact that it is to some degree. Okay, if you are going to be in a dispute with someone else over whether they violated the NAP, there is some system that resolves those disputes. Even if it's your private, dispute resolution organization that you're paying fees to, if it's a more classic, minarchy, where there's a centralized court system, there's no getting around the fact that disputes over what is or is not aggression will come up, and those disputes will need to get arbitrated, and it will be men who decide those disputes. And there's just
yes, that's correct. But like for example, the example you gave was that, for example, it's that it would have been an act of aggression to not. I think it would have been an act of aggression for other people to not provide you with a service. That would, for example, not be a valid argument for like a case of a violation of the NAP, because not enslaving people is not a violation of, or like enslaving people is not a violation of the NAP, for instance. Like that's more or less what I meant. And my second point is essentially that you can't entirely divorce theory from reality, like basically throughout this entire discussion. And I mean this with no disrespect or anything. It's just that you've made the claim that essentially reality and theory are essentially divorced from one another or separate from one another, or that we have to compromise on certain principles because that's not how certain things play out in real life, and we ought to aim for certain outcomes. But essentially the correspondence theory of truth suggests that we hold these principles because they are derived from reality. Like the NAP and like the principles that stem from it, they are not just like arbitrary. They stem from the nature of mankind, essentially. Like, so it's kind of incorrect to claim that certain things play out differently in reality when essentially the libertarian theory stems from reality, I think. So essentially rejecting certain principles entirely, you're essentially saying that the theory itself is incorrect. So, like, I just don't see how rejecting certain ideals that stem from, like, libertarian philosophy is the best way to go about enforcing libertarian philosophy, or, achieving an anarcho-capitalist society. Like, how is rejecting certain anarcho-capitalist principles or libertarian principles the best way to go about achieving an anarcho-capitalist society? That would be my question.
I'm not trying to reject them, although I do think it's debate. I'm not going to start this debate right now. Maybe we'll do this on episode 2, assuming I'm invited back, on the degree to which they're true in an absolute sense. But even taking it as them being true in an absolute sense, the goal is to achieve them in the real world. For me, the goal is to achieve them in the real world as much as possible. And so if one set of choices leads me to getting 80 or 90% of them, and another set of choices leads me to getting, 50% of them, I'm going to choose the set of choices that leads me to getting 80 to 90% of them. And so that's all I'm trying to say, is that Like it's not a rejection of the philosophy. It's a desire to get as close to the philosophy as possible, given the constraints of the real world. Okay, and I believe, I believe these trade-offs are real. I believe they exist. I don't believe there is some easy path to getting 100% of what you want. And so, what we're trying to do in New Hampshire is get as much of it as we can, given the constraints, of the real world. We're not trying to reject it, or say that the philosophy is stupid, or or say that you're wrong to uh, to be striving towards that end. And in fact, I found the happiest I am in my life is when I'm chasing towards, some sort of transcendental end, some sort of end I might never achieve, but I feel like I'm making positive progress towards it. Like every day, I'm a little bit closer, to this end. And to me, that is largely what life in New Hampshire is like. We do want to get as close to Ancapistan, as we can. And we're making little incremental choices and little incremental progress, day after day. So I don't see it as a rejection of that. But I gotta
see.
go.
So it's more of a matter of making smaller concessions to achieve bigger goals, I guess, in the way of that.
To some extent. Monhopper, Zulu, you got any closing thoughts or comments for me before I go eat dinner?
No, just to say thank you for coming on, Jeremy, and yeah, you will be invited back again. Just DM myself or Zulu, or we can DM you. We'll reach out at some point if you'd like to come back on. We'd be happy to have you. So that's all I really had to say, unless Zulu wants to jump in at all as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you have any topics you wish to discuss, this is definitely, the Remnant is definitely a home for you. So thank you very much for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate everyone who tuned in. I will say that haters are fans too. So even if you don't like me, I like you. And thank you, and have a good night, everyone.
See ya.
Cheers. All right. Zulu, do you want to go for a little bit longer? Totally your call. I'm happy to stick around. I do eventually have to go in the not too distant future, but happy to kick around for a bit longer if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good to keep going. I know there were some topics we should probably discuss today. We had arranged a few. Obviously,
yeah, of course.
Jeremy was the main topic, so we've spent the first part on that. But there are things going on which we could perhaps talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And I do just want to say, like, there's certain things, and I've to his credit, for instance, Rational Dissident bringing up the theory practice dichotomy, like we'd wanted to talk about that. But, the reality with this sort of thing is we're just not going to get to every single critique that we have of every single position that Jeremy's going to take. So if your pet position that you want to, argue wasn't represented on this platform on this particular occasion, then I'm sorry about that. Hopefully, obviously, we've just initiated an opportunity for future discussions with him. So hopefully, it'll be brought up in that frame. But Zulu, so did you want to talk about the whole the whole Sarah Stock Elijah Schaefer incident or situation that unfolded a couple of days ago on this very platform?
Yeah, so I've been very interested in this because it's very amusing to me. Like you see, the classic like archetype of the Republican senator is that during the RNC they go off and bang some like tranny prostitute or something, and we're seeing this in now the modern Catholic movement, where these are like supposed to be Catholic influencers who are supposed to be like upholding God and everything. And yet they're going around banging each other. Elijah Schaefer was apparently like a drug addict, and he had a twink phase, and he was banging Sarah Stock, who allegedly he had her get an abortion, so that their unborn child wouldn't be found out. This is insane to me. This is crazy. But I will say, like, it's very the part which saddens me is like Schaefer, he has like children, and he's got a wife. And Sarah Stock, a very young husband, like they were a very young couple. That's terrible, and horrible thing to do. And I think these people, you got to be wary of these sorts. They're gonna they're gonna try and grift on your movement, whatever movement you're in. They're gonna try and grift on your movement. And by the way, this is what my collab video with TaxPress is going to be about. It's all about my theory of grifting and where it comes from and how to deal with it.
For sure. And just so people, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are coming through via YouTube that don't even have an X account. And, maybe some people on X that, I mean, it was pretty big on the platform, but maybe some people missed it entirely. But basically, Sarah Stock was like this, or still is, I suppose. She hasn't died or anything, but is like a trad cath, like advocating for, very traditional Catholic or Christian views as far as marriage and as far as like the role of women and how and in particular was very 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 derogatory towards promiscuous women, and not it's like massively promiscuous women, like not just OnlyFans models or porn stars or prostitutes, but pretty much any woman who had premarital sex was, enemy number one from her perspective. And Elijah Schaefer, like, wasn't really, again, haven't died or anything, but I'm assuming that they're going to be their public personas are going to be different moving forward. So that's why I'm using the past tense. But Elijah was not quite the traditionalist type vein, but still deeply like Christian in his prescriptions, and had very like red pilled and kind of those types of views towards sex and relationships. Anyway, so they were caught having an affair basically by Milo Yiannopoulos. There's a blast from like
Which is very
2015,
funny also because
2016, Rex
he's
feminist videos
he's like a
rearing his head up
homosexual as
again.
well.
Yeah, exactly. Him basically like exposed like these text messages that him and Elijah had and voice messages and stuff where they'd both admitted to having an affair with one another. There was the allegation that there was an abortion involved. As far as I know, that's unverified. It's just someone making an allegation. So I don't want to act as if that was definitively happened. But it is pretty much confirmed at this point, or it is confirmed that Elijah and Sarah had an affair. Bearing in mind that, yes, Sarah is a 22-year-old, woman of allegedly deeply Christian traditionalist views who had taken the view that, yeah, if you had sex before marriage, you were a sinner. Meanwhile, she was having sex with her boss. That's the other thing, that Elijah was her boss on the platform they were on. And meanwhile, she was professing herself to be a virgin in preparation for marriage with her husband. And she's now married. Allegedly, the affair was broken off when they got engaged. But for many, many months in the lead up to their engagement, when they were probably in the courting phase, you would have thought she was cheating on him with Elijah, and that is just like just fundamentally insane to me that happened. And well, insane in the one sense, and also not in another sense, because I think, and I'll throw it back to you, Zulu, on this, but like my updated view when it comes to influencers and e-girls and various people on these platforms is I treat their public persona and the public prescriptions and views that they hold and their private lives as basically having no correlation to one another. You can find progressives who you can actually find have said and done very racist things, despite being outwardly like super anti-racist. For instance, Anthony Fantano, the music critic, who is like a shit lib type. There's a 10-minute long compilation of him saying the N-word floating around just over and over and over again. And despite the fact that he would be the sort of person who, if you said it, even in the context of, making a comment about what someone else said, if you said the word, he would probably criticize you for that. Meanwhile, there's this 10-minute compilation floating around of him. And on the flip side, you have this example of like the traditionalist conservative types who will just flagrantly commit adultery and then also allegedly kill off their unborn child. So yeah, I treat influencers' public personas and their private lives as, unless I can demonstrate otherwise, completely independent of one another. They're not actually all that correlated in my experience.
Yeah, and I think Sarah Stock in particular, I think she's essentially like defrauded her husband, who's supposed to be a very wealthy man. Because she was putting up this front of like, no, we're gonna wait till marriage. Meanwhile, she's having a fucking affair with her boss. We're gonna wait till marriage. We're gonna get our marriage blessed by the Pope. She got their marriage blessed by the Pope. And there are all these tweets of her where she's like, no, you should never get a prenup or anything of the sort. That's terrible. So I mean, there's a very real case to be made by her husband. If he decides to go forward with it, he might be, this is the unfortunate part with Catholics, is they're like, no, marriage is until death do us part. He might just, cuck, essentially. Obviously, I don't want to speak on the guy's life. He's probably going through the worst experience ever.
Oh, man, like, I was going to say the same thing. I don't think that they're in the realm of marriage and relationships. I don't think that it gets much worse than that. Than what's just happened to this guy. I don't think it gets much worse.
Where he's celibate until marriage to basically give her all this money, and meanwhile she's cucking him on a daily basis. Like, there's a very real case to be made that she's defrauded him. She's lying to him in order to get access to his money. So I think that's a very real problem, at least from the libertarian perspective there. This is a terrible injustice being done unto him. And then obviously fucking Elijah's, wife, she was chaste, right? She was the stay-at-home mother. She hasn't been developing her career at all. She has just been staying at home. Like, I think she has a real case, definitely within the US courts. She can probably get a very good alimony arrangement out of this. Because, I mean, these people have really done something very terrible to their wives. And even still, Elijah, like, he went on Twitter, the method he's taking to deal with this is like, oh yeah, I've got a dick and it works. Shut up, libtards. Like, he's being, like, proud of what he did. It's like, Jesus Christ, aren't you supposed to be like a Catholic influencer? Like, what the hell's wrong with you? How can anybody take these people seriously after this point?
It does show that they just have no principles, because he will immediately oscillate away from the tradcath line and towards like the red pilled, hypergamy. I can fuck as many women as I want because I'm an alpha male. That type of spiel. And on that, this has been part of my full circle moment as far as relationships and just general life advice, because there was a time when Andrew Tate was coming along, and there's various red pill influencers were basically having the take, and it was even like they were making a secular argument that basically you should look for a woman that is as low body count, and is maybe not virginal, but at the very least low body count and is minimal fuss and all that kind of thing. And my take on that was, there was a time where when I was younger, where I would buy into that and be like, yeah, like that's what you should be striving for. Now, from my perspective, I don't think that's really the case. I would rather just have a woman that's honest, and I think most women that are claiming that are of the Sarah Stock variety, that are claiming this status as being virgins or being just generally chaste, are probably lying to you. And so, in my current relationship, there's all these red pillars that, would call my current relationship cucked because my girlfriend has had sexual relations with other men prior to meeting me, and prior to us dating one another. And it's like, okay, well, I'd rather my future wife, I hope she's my future wife, who knows, but my current girlfriend and hopefully lifelong partner, I'd rather her have had previous sexual relationships than her claim to be a virgin and simultaneously be actually cucking me, like behind closed doors with her boss or something. Like, of those two preferences, of those two realities, there's one that I would definitively prefer over the other. So that's been kind of my full circle moment as far as sex and relationships. But yeah, look, the libertarian position on it, like, as far as I can tell, this guy did just get defrauded. Like, he got into this relationship based on the presumption that he was marrying a woman of a particular value set and that had a particular past attached to her, and it was doing particular things. And so I think absolutely the libertarian prescription would be like, hey, at the very least, Sarah's not getting half of this, like the whole anti-prenup thing. Well, like the libertarian view would be like, hey, you defrauded this guy. This marriage was never, I don't know your take on this, Zulu, but the marriage was never actually a valid, maybe not a valid contract, but the contract of the marriage was broken because the entire premise of it was that, you know, they had there's a particular state of affairs occurring around it that wasn't actually true.
Yeah, and you know, there is one more thing I want to go into, which is, you know, some people in chat have brought this up. Pardon me. Where there's this power differential argument, where Elijah had this huge power differential over Sarah Stock, so he was like grooming her or whatever. I think this is a load of Me Too nonsense. She's an adult. She's able to make her own goddamn decisions, and like you never, you know, I'm gonna play the classic conservative line of imagine the roles reversed. You never hear this in reverse. Like there's some fucking you know, big female movie star. I'm trying to look it up right now. I think it might have been Julia Roberts, where she fell in love with like some guy who was just like a key grip or some shit. Yeah, he was a cinematographer on the normal Heart. I think this is the guy. I think it is Julia Roberts. Where, you know, nobody's like, oh my god, she's raping him, even though she's like, you know, way more famous than him. It's never applied the other way. So like, no, she maintains moral culpability here, and legal culpability, I believe, because I think this is fraud. She's engaged in this basically. No, we're not going to have a prenup, and you're going to give me half your money forever, under false pretenses. And that's why, you know, because there is this argument Leonard Peikoff makes, where, you know, he's been divorced like a bunch of times, where he said he's never gotten a prenup because he thinks that means you're not going into it with both feet. You know, you're only dipping your toe in, and it's marriage, so you should go in with both feet. But that's not quite true, because you're just defending yourself against the very biased and irrational family courts. That's what you're doing with a prenup. You're defending yourself against fraud, essentially. Because the family courts, who knows whether they're going to recognize that as fraud? Who fucking knows that? Like, it's completely up in the wind. You might get a fucking feminist judge up there who'll just be like, no, she's the woman, she's really young, you're really rich, and being really rich is bad, so you're going to give, you know, her a constant paycheck forever. And now that the affair has been revealed, she can't even get a job, she can't continue her job as an influencer, so now you're going to give her a paycheck forever, because she cucked you. Like, this is the type of thing which can happen.
Right. And to, you know, I use this analogy, I think we covered similar ground last time, but, you know, if I'll use a slightly different analogy, because the last analogy I used was like, hey, just because you put your seatbelt on and you have car insurance doesn't mean that you're not 100% committed to driving your car safely when you get behind the wheel. But another example, like, look, if you went into surgery and you had a choice of two doctors, all else being equal, would you prefer the doctor that didn't have malpractice insurance or the doctor that did? And the idea that your argument would be, well, I want the doctor without malpractice insurance because I'm confident that he's going to be far more committed to completing the surgery successfully. It's like, no, you retard. Like, obviously the doctor that also has malpractice insurance is still like committed to, you know, keeping his job and keeping his career and not killing his patient. Okay, obviously he's still committed to that, but he's also ensured that the downside risk of something, if something was to go wrong, is covered so that I'm financially, you know, more secure in that scenario than the other. So, you know, it's a nonsense argument, and people seem to just apply different standards to relationships and love. And you know, there's an element of that I can get because, you know, almost tautologically, you know, love is romantic, and so there's an element of emotion in it to where there isn't when it comes to driving cars. But that's where I would ask people to think rationally about these things. And, you know, again, having a prenup has this, I suppose, negative baggage associated with it, especially amongst women, which I can kind of understand, where it's like, you know, the man wants a prenup so that he can get away with not ever having to pay a cent of child support or, you know, support or spousal support. If, you know, he can just go out and cheat on his wife and do whatever the fuck he wants. And then, you know, if she finds out about it, well, they can get a divorce and then he won't have to do anything to support her in the future, even if she's given up her career and her life in support of the family. That's not what Zulu or I seem to be advocating for. Okay, what we're advocating for is for you and your partner to come up with a solution or a position that is amenable to both of you. Okay, rather than leaving it up to the state to decide what the amenable solution is for both of you. And in the process, there's going to be a lengthy court battle potentially where lawyers are going to get involved. And so, you talk about 50-50. If you go through the state, it's more like you each get a third, and then a third is kept by the lawyers that you both had to hire in order to resolve this whole thing. So you're better off just get a fucking prenup, figure it out. Like, yeah, as a guy, probably commit to paying some child support and some spousal support to your wife if you end up getting divorced, if she's going to be a stay-at-home mother that's not going to have a career, because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, prenup, a lot of people assume that means, yeah, the man keeps everything. But, like, no, if you are going to have, like, a stay-at-home mum situation where she's not developing her career at all, it's totally rational to bake into that prenup, well, like, hey, you will require, like, X amount of money to, like, take that risk. That is a risk that the woman is taking on in order to be with that man, on the presumption that they're going to be forever with each other forever. But, like, what if that doesn't work out? Well, bake that into the prenup. Where it's like, okay, well, yeah, if this doesn't go the right way, and we do get a divorce, well, yeah, I'll have to financially compensate you for the lost opportunity of raising our children. That seems entirely fair to me.
Shit, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, and I made the the really like autistic kind of argument that last time they're like, hey, if you decide to like the obviously the libertarian position on children is that the mother ultimately has the fundamental right to be the guardian of that child. So the exchange would be something like, hey, I'll grant you access to your children in exchange for access to your resources in order to keep these children alive, more or less. Like, that's going to be the exchange that kind of takes place in the case of a broken marriage. But yeah, look, I think is there anything else you want to discuss with that topic, Zulu, or like up to you? I'm not too fast.
Nah, I think we've pretty much covered that.
Yeah, sweet. Look, I mean, the other thing I want to talk about is that, unfortunately, because I'd just been extolling how great it was that Dave had unblocked me and started engaging with me on X. He blocked me like 2 days after our space because he made that, because the whole like ICE thing happened with, I think it was the Alex Preddy guy that got shot or killed by an ICE agent. And then he basically came out and was like, oh, this is horrible. Like, how could ICE be doing this to people? Like, clearly, I was in support of immigration restrictions, but this is just a step too far. And so I basically quote tweeted him and called him out. I was like, Dave, like, you weren't just like, just saying, yeah, we should maybe have some reasonable restrictions. Like, when push came to shove, you were advocating for militarizing the border and doing whatever, shutting this shit down by any means necessary. And he wasn't too happy about me for that. So he responded to me a couple of times and then blocked me again. So that was a bit of a shame. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Zulu.
Yeah, I mean that is funny fundamentally, but yeah, no, I mean, like, eventually he's gotta realize he can't eat his cake and have it too. Like, this is far less than what he was advocating for. If they had B-2 bombers going over, Mexican neighborhoods in California, in Southern California, and bombing them, then that would be more appropriate for what Dave was asking for, because he wants, again, the entire fucking military to secure the US border by any means necessary. That's what he wants. So, I mean, gee whiz, give that order to any general in the US military, and holy crap, you're gonna get Predator drones flying overhead. You're gonna get all this sort of stuff. Like, this is a fraction, a tiny, 1% of what Dave Smith's ideal policy. If you just took Dave Smith as I presented him in that video, which he backed up completely. He did not say, no, I didn't actually mean any of that. You clipped me out of context there. He claimed I clipped out of context for, Jack Lloyd or whatever. But, if you just sent Dave Smith, if you just sent Donald Trump the clips from Dave Smith where he has not claimed I clipped him out of context, and you said, Donald Trump, go ahead with all of these plans and prescriptions by Dave Smith, geez Louise, ICE would be a drop in the bucket. It wouldn't even, nobody would be talking about ICE, they'd be talking about the fucking tanks rolling down their street, and people, military men, blowing up their door and saying, do you have any enemies of the state in here? It would be a genocide by Dave Smith's standards. It would be 100 times worse than what is happening in Israel right now. That's what Dave Smith advocated for. At a certain point, he's got to just kind of own that and say, yeah, I advocated for that, and I was wrong or something, and look what Zulu was right. At some point, you got to do that.
Right, and I'll get to friend Harper real quick, who's got their hand up, but just quickly as well, I did find it quite funny that this fragile coalition that Dave has built up, or tried to claim he's building up within the broader right wing movement around this particular issue, was like just instantaneously fell apart the second he expressed even like a minutia of trepidation about what was being done. Like he was like, I'm still an immigration restrictionist, but I don't think like ICE agents should be shooting people, in the street. And then like Matt Walsh is calling him an open borders communist, which I just thought was like literally.
Yeah, what was the game?
You literally could not design it better than Dave Smith being called an open borders communist, which is the exact charge he leveled against us by the guys that he was trying to cozy up with and cuddle up with, for being like, yeah, maybe ICE agents shouldn't be killing people in the streets. Like that was absolutely hilarious to me. I thought.
Yeah, we need to get Matt Walsh onto the Liberty Lockdown podcast and say, look, I live in reality, and I think it's just fucking crazy. If you believe in open borders like Dave Smith right now, then you're as bad as a communist or a Nazi. And we need to get Matt Walsh to say all these things, and then, maybe just shine the mirror at Dave a little bit.
I do think they have, beyond just the irony part and, the Schadenfreude, like, they do actually have a point where it's like, okay, Dave, like, you advocate for immigration restriction and mass deportations in the abstract, but it seems like the second that those policies actually get enforced, and this was the point that Alex Narasta brought up to him in the debate, it's like, look, you have to, you can't divorce yourself from advocating for the means by which a policy that you support is going to be carried out. Okay, and so like Will Chamberlain, like this Israel guy, and right winger, like quote tweeted Dave and was like, I'm an immigration restrictionist, like quoting Dave, who said he was an immigration restrictionist. Like, I'm an immigration restrictionist. I just don't support any of the means by which we will restrict immigration, or something like to that effect. And he was right in a sense, because Dave has this like seemingly like platonic ideal of what immigration restriction is going to look like, and that somehow the state is going to roll out and say, hey, we're going to deport all you guys, and then all the illegal immigrants are just going to come quietly and just leave without anything having to be done. And like he seems to think that the mere presence of the military with bombs and tanks rolling down the street is going to be enough for people to just willingly come quietly. Well, that's clearly never what was going to happen. And the right wing is we accepted that as libertarians. We were like, yeah, obviously, this is going to lead to disaster and this is going to lead to a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence if you advocate for this policy, and that's bad. And the right wing is like, yeah, this is going to lead to a lot of violence, a lot of bloodshed, and we're okay with that. And Dave was like stuck in the middle, like, okay, I'm not okay with bloodshed, but also I support the exact same policy. So it just made no fucking sense. Anyway, we'll go to friend Harper, and I think that's going to be the last hand. I do have to head off now. So friend Harper, please jump in, and then we will start to wrap things up.
Mic check.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. I just had a quick question for Zulu, and I thought of this question while you guys were talking to Jeremy and his criticism that basically everybody has to be on the same page about, one, what words mean, and two, what the theories mean based off of the words you're using. So I was wondering if maybe Zulu could abstract a sort of like, how do we get a culture on the same page about something like objective concept formation? Like, I'm reading through Ayn Rand's book on forming concepts, but I bet like a bunch of people could make a bunch of different types of books, and then it's like, how do you get one geographical location's worth of people to get on board with even one of them? Like, do you think you'd have to start with teaching these things in school at an early age, or elect people who have read these things? But yeah, that's my question.
Sure. So I think that is all very, very, very far downstream of doing Isaiah's job, of being the radical, of pushing the philosophy. Because when the philosophy of the day is changed towards objectivism, well, like shit, all that's downstream. You'll have, millions and billions of people working on that issue within their own specific sector and trying to make it as objectivist as possible. Like that is the ultimate solution. Like, I'm not sitting here and pretending that I am the central planner who knows how to get this done in every single sector of the economy. It'll get done once you change the philosophy of the day. That's the fundamental there. And so, how do you get a given region into that state? Well, then there are a few ways. You can do the free state thing, where you bring a bunch of people who already believe in that into that area, and then you can flip it very easily that way. Obviously, you're going to be limited on the size of that area and everything like that, but you can do that, and and then you just keep coming up with these solutions for, like, oh, we've got this new problem, and we gotta solve this new problem, and how do we get this to most align with libertarianism and objectivism and stuff like that? Well, that's what the market's for. That's why we have many people doing this. That's how you do it. But the fundamental is changing the philosophy. That's the fundamental there. That's the important part to get.
Gotcha. I just tried one of the motivators for me asking something like that is I talk to a lot of people, and just like people I work with, or I get on VR chat and I soapbox a little bit, and some people will hear me out, and I find that like Christianity doesn't have its own idea of concept formation, and as long as I don't say an atheist philosopher came up with this theory, and then I tell them about like like genus differentia stuff and stuff like that, they're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I was just kind of thinking that you might be able to get people onto kind of like using concepts to identify facts or reality without necessarily getting everybody on egoism or like the primacy of existence. But right on, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, real quick. Thanks for that, friend Harper. I'll put something up in the Jumbotron up here at the top. LPNH grabbing a clip from Zulu's stream and criticizing it. So sending everyone to go say Zal Zulu in the chat in response to that. Please go ahead and do that. That would be fantastic.
Definitely.
Yeah, look, that will just about wrap things up. The one thing I do want to say about that. So the Kauffman thing, right? One of the criticisms that we didn't level at him, at the very least, didn't level at him enough, as much as I would like to in that particular stream, and that's obviously understandable because there's so much ground to cover there. But he will make this argument, and it will be something along the lines of, I want to. I think about, well, what would a privatized society look like? And then I, take steps to figure out how to achieve that. It's like, well, hold on. What do you mean you know what a privatized society would look like? Like, no, you don't. You're not the central planner. You don't have the information required to know exactly what, the organization of society is going to look like. You don't even know if that park that you like taking your children to will even be a park when it's fully privatized. So how are you going to say that you know not only what that piece of property is going to be, but also how to ensure that it is properly enforced? You don't know either of those things because you're not the central planner. Like, I understand there is room to have like an ideal, like, hey, this is what I think society might look like, and we can debate, okay, what kind of bureaucratic structure would take hold. But saying with certainty, that enough certainty in order to advocate for policies around it, especially aggressive ones, that is insane from my perspective. It's for a libertarian to claim. So that's all I kind of have with that. But yeah, go ahead, everyone. Make sure we get onto that LPNH tweet and tell them that we Zal Zulu. But yeah, Zulu, any last thoughts before we close things off?
Yeah, no, that pretty much I think wraps up for me. Thank you very much, everybody who came along. I'll be reading the super chats and watching that clip and seeing what they're saying about it after the space is closed. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming along. It was very much appreciated. And I'll see you guys in just under a fortnight. Probably going to be on a Friday again.
Yes, exactly. That's the hope. Funnily enough, my the plans that I had that made the day moved end up getting moved themselves, so we would have been available for the normal time, but it was too late to make another adjustment. But anyway, yes, we will be back to, assuming all is well, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled slot next time. But yeah, thanks for everyone for coming along, and we'll see you next time.
Peace. Here. Save that. What is LPNH saying? And again, I'll get to the super chats in just a moment. But I want to see this.
I just want to say that I'm mainly in libertarianism for the philosophy, and I can respect Jeremy for what he's trying to do in the world. And I mean, I'm really autistic when it comes to philosophy, but I can be like really chill, live and let live people in person in real life. So I think that Jeremy is a force for good in the world, but I'm just not too interested in. But basically, I don't mean any disrespect, Jeremy, but from what you said so far, your understanding of libertarianism sounds kind of normie-like, especially since you don't seem to have a very philosophical understanding of what aggression actually means, and like the ways that Roth.
Yeah, I did think when he said he seemed very normie, like I assumed that would piss him off a little bit.
Bard or Hopper defines it, but just I just want to say that I don't mean any disrespect, and keep doing what you're doing in the world, but I strongly suggest that you eventually do come around to the philosophy.
Yeah, so I mean, Acorn's point here. So they're saying, whoops, daisies. Interested in libertarianism just for the philosophy, and you're not interested in the contact patch between the philosophy and the real world, and you're not willing to put skin in the game, you probably don't need to move to New Hampshire. So, I assume that whoever wrote this tweet is assuming that Acorn is like one of these left libertarian types, where he's just interested in libertarianism as like a rationalist, or either that or as a means towards being a degenerate. That's absolutely not true of Acorn at all. I speak to Acorn on a regular basis. He's a good man. So that's false. I do want to comment on this like contact patch between the philosophy and the real world. Well, that's first of all, that's theory practice dichotomy. Right? If the theory is correct, the theory is theory about reality. So if the theory is correct, you don't have to like work out this contact patch. That's like not some extra step you have to work out. Right? If the theory is correct, then it's correct, and you should abide by that theory. And now within that theory, within the bounds of that theory, you can start making more theory. You can start making a theory about strategy. You can start making a theory about how should we select judges. That's all, that's not legal theory. That's all downstream of legal theory, right? It's applying legal theory to some issue. So that's not like a contact patch. And I will say also, this is Chronic's point. Nikola Pavkovich, if you've seen his stream with Fabian Liberty on the arrow of aggression theorem. This is also relevant. So, if you have, this is basically his theory of how to properly evaluate policy from the libertarian perspective. If you have some policy, you have to look at which way the arrow is pointing with that policy. So a policy which says, we're going to get rid of this amount of income tax because we think the income tax is unjustified and it should be done away with, well, that points towards libertarianism. Right? That because the justification for that policy, the principle behind it, the premise underlying that policy is libertarianism. It's the premise that the income tax is unjustified. Now, if instead the policy was exactly the same, but it said we're going to reduce the income tax because we want to maximize state income so we can invade Iran. You know, it's some Laffer curve thing. It's a very laughable curve, I'll say. That is to be evaluated negatively by the libertarian, because that points towards socialism. This is to do with Mises' idea of how there is no middle road between socialism and capitalism, right? It points towards socialism. If you keep recursively applying that principle over and over and over again, you end up in socialism. That's what it means by regression. That's what Mises means by regression, right? So that's what I'll say on that. We do have some super chats I should probably go over as well, if it'll load. The fuck? I can see. Fan funding. Here we go. I'll look at it this way. So there's one from I wonder if I can do it this way. Yeah, that works. So, Lacey Faye for $50. Thank you very much. That's a lot of money. Many libertarian communities online are being astroturfed by leftists and neoliberals doing fellow libertarian optics since Trump took power, such as framing libertarianism as pro-immigration instead of opposition to government control of borders. Yeah, you see this all the time with the Chase Oliver sorts. Most libertarian affiliates are like this. It's very much a terrible thing. I mean, just the other day, I saw this guy who was like the candidate for Libertarian Party of Georgia, and these were the two policies that they put front and foremost to advertise this guy. It was that he wants to abolish the income tax, and that he wants to regulate data centers. Data centers are so terrible. We need to regulate them. They're taking all our water and taking all our power. And it was just complete economically illiterate bullshit this guy was doing. Let's see if I can find this this tweet. Profile. Likes. No, be in my replies. Replies. So I didn't like this tweet. It was a bad tweet. Yeah. This fella, Andrew Underwood. AndrewForGeorgia.com. Let's just check that out. And by the way, I'll let you properly read that. He's running to abolish the income tax, and he's running to regulate the data centers plaguing Northwest Georgia. He's a libertarian, guys. So I looked at this morning. I looked at his issues. You look at his justification, it's just totally economically illiterate. Data centers. Privacy has been a dead end, blah, 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 blah. He's pissed off about the flock cameras, right? Georgians are furious with their rising power costs that are being used to fund large data centers in Rome and other places across the state. These data centers are used by companies like Flock Safety to store our information and compile profiles on our behavior. Being out in public does not give these companies the right to constantly surveil us. I will vote for a nationwide moratorium of data centers as Congress looks at privacy laws, privacy protections. So, yeah, Georgians are furious with their rising power costs that are being used to fund large data centers. That doesn't pass the sniff test at all, right? Because what that's implying is that these data centers are in the area, right? And that's driving up the cost of electricity. But is that increased cost being used to fund the data center? No, the data center has to pay that cost as well. They're bidding up the cost, right? That's being used to fund the electricity companies so they can build more infrastructure and deliver more electricity to you. That's what it's being used to fund. It's not being used to fund the consumer of electricity. That doesn't make any sense at all. That does not pass the sniff test. So I am not confident at all in this person. And I think if you're in Georgia, you should perhaps spoil your ballot, because this guy is a fucking retard. But anyway, Captain ANCAP for $10. Thank you very much. I love your content, Zulu. Keep fighting for liberty. We'd love to hang out on your Discord and share your share thoughts with the community. Well, thank you very much, and I did send him a link earlier. And then Heterodox Agnostic 8070 for 1,000 krooners. That's a lot of money, I assume. Thank you very much. I'd like this money to organize more debates that like you used to. Entertaining, and I am stronger on the philosophy when I watch it. Indeed, I will be doing more of that. So thank you for the suggestion. And yeah, the debates are coming back. And then there's a Huge Hat Harold for $5. No message attached, thank you very much. And then Steve Harp, 1867 for £5. Kyle Kauffman, yes or no? Either way, Zal Zulu. I won't necessarily say Kyle Kauffman, but I will say I do like Kauffman. I will give an anecdote from when I visited New Hampshire. Basically, I was staying outside of Boston at the time, and then guy who runs the Morgan Meets the Eye podcast. Let's bring that up. This feller, who I've been on his show a few times. I don't know if doesn't look like he's still doing it. Yeah, no, looks like he's not doing it. Actually, his last episode with Jeremy Kauffman, which is interesting enough. But yeah, no. He there was like a group of us there. He like picked us up, and he like drove us up to New Hampshire, and we met Kauffman. And we met up in this like bar, and they wouldn't serve me because I only had a UK driver's license. I didn't have my passport with me. And he just immediately like, no, we're ending the meal right there. Give us the bill, and I'm not going to tip you. Like, whoa, okay. That's because it's just this idea of, no, you have to be inhospitable. These people who are trying to treat you like shit. And I found that very, very nice of him. And he stood up for me basically there. I like that very much. So I like Jeremy, but I won't necessarily go as far as to say Kyle Kauffman or anything like that. I think he's wrong about his strategic points and his points on pragmatism. I think he's wrong about that. But he's a solid fella. So yeah, I'm supportive of Kauffman to that extent. And then Nuclear Mayhem 9238 for 20 kroner. Thank you very much. Oops, I forgot the stream. What happened so far? Well, I guess you'll have to, I guess you have to go watch it back, as a number of things happened. But yeah, anyway, thank you very much, everybody who came along, who supported the stream especially. And yeah, I'll see you guys 2 weeks' time on Friday.